Welcome to the In Search of More podcast. I am your host, Ellie Nash. Join me weekly on my quest for more from myself and more from this world. We'll see you on the other side.
All right, welcome to Levi.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
I'm sitting here with Levi Shmotkin, not Rebbe yet.
Levi Shmotkin's good.
Levi Shmotkin, the author of Letters for Life. The tagline is
Guidance for Emotional Wellness from the Lubavitch Rebbe.
Guidance for Emotional Wellness from the Lubavitch Rebbe. Okay, it's a serious undertaking. So you and I were introduced by Rabbi Shais Taub years ago. So I'll tell you a story. I grew up Chabad yeshivas, as you may know. I learned what they put in front of me. I tried to study and understand what was put in front of me. But the whole subject of Chassidus was kind of like I blackballed it. I was one of those guys who learned Gemara during Sichas, sometimes. Not Sichas, during Chassidus.
You're like the Masnagid of the class.
Kind of, yeah. Yeah, I didn't understand the Arin Saif, Zia, Zerampen. Like, what are you talking about? It wasn't made practical at all. And even Sichas, which didn't always have that language, it often, okay, like I don't know what to do with this topic. Not that I never learned Sichas. Actually, there was a guy in yeshiva, his name is Ari Maranovsky. I'll out him. And I don't know how it happened, but he and I decided to learn every Sikh on Purim somehow. I think it was something like that. Or maybe he decided and I was one of his, one of several people he worked with. But I remember something about like every Sikh on Purim being learned and me being involved in that. So I did go through those. I'm not saying it wasn't part of it, but it wasn't interesting to me. Years later, personal development, 12 steps, whatever, my life took me, therapy, all of those things, and it's become a foundational perspective in life. To me, if someone calls me with a business problem, I say, get your mind right. Get your mind right, the business will follow. A relationship issue, get your mind right, the business will follow. Even a physical health issue, half the time, but get your mind right, the rest will follow. If the mind is off, everything goes off. And if the mind is right, there's a building block for the rest. That's kind of the framework. Anyway, several years ago, I decided to start learning Sichas. But the reason I decided to start learning Sichas was not because I was interested in personal development or anything else, was because it occurred to me that the Rebbe was a foundational figure in my life, regardless of what I thought about him, which I didn't know at the time. I went in that place from a searching place. And I can think he's a good person, a bad person, a positive influence, negative influence. I had no idea. I'm not coming from that perspective. I heard all sorts of wonderful things about him. I definitely had a lot of negative associations with various parts of my upbringing, and I didn't know which were from him or not from him. There were a lot of ways people related to him, which were very aversive to me. But I wasn't coming from a good or a bad. I was just coming from a standpoint of he was a foundational figure in my life. My parents wouldn't have met if not for his movement. They wouldn't have been married. I wouldn't have grown up where I grew up. I should understand who this guy is. And it occurred to me that if I want to understand, I shouldn't ask anyone because people have too many opinions and they use him in some way. So I should just read his work. And such began exploration where I started with selections of Likutei Sichos, Bereshis, and I just started going through it. And I remember speaking with Shais while into this, exploration on my part. And I said, this guy's like a treasure trove of personal development. So he actually did a podcast, me and him together, called The Treasure Trove of Personal, I think that's what we call it, Treasure Trove of Personal Development. We did it as a live webinar, and eventually I put it on the podcast. It's one of the early episodes on In Search of More. Is Lubavitch Rebbe. I think the tagline was A Treasure Trove of Personal Development. So I'm glad you caught up to this to this thing. But I'm just saying, it's come full circle. Right? Meaning, I think that conversation and that exploration with Shais, that when you eventually starting to work on this, it's cool that he put us together, and now here we are. You've published the book. It's probably 4 or 5 years after that initial email. The initial conversation we had. Mm-hmm. And the book just came out. I read it. It's phenomenally done. Thank you so much for the effort. And now you're on a speaking tour, and you're kind enough to remember... You know, one of the guys before you became famous.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so tell us about, if you had to sum up the Rebbe's perspective on mental health? If it could be, I know you're doing that in the book, but if you had to sum it up in a teaser format, what would you even try?
So I would say, I think we had this conversation once, and you asked me to say it in 2 words. I think the words that came to me then was mind expansion. A big part of what the Rebbe seems to be after is the sense of isolation, where you become more and more lost into your own world and your own thoughts and your own feelings, and you become more and more entangled and maybe enslaved to them. And what it seems to be the overarching direction that the Rebbe is going in his counseling is to open our minds, open our hearts, and in a very much also open our actions toward connecting to the bigger whole, towards taking our mind out of the preoccupation with the self and connecting it with Hashem, connecting it with a sense of shluchus, of a mission, connecting it with thinking about other people and what's going through in their life, and not in a way of like shutting down. On the contrary, through a very internal process, but an internal process where you're pointing your mind and your heart towards expansion versus towards, I would say, maybe becoming deeper and deeper lost within your own world. Does that answer your question?
I think so. Towards the end of that, you said not in a way of, I think, like avoiding self. So explain what that is, because someone hearing this could say, okay, like, so anything that brings someone inward into the self. So let's say a therapy session, someone may be talking about what happened to themselves in childhood, or their parents, their mother and father's behaviors or choices impacted them, and go into that. You would say he's counseling against that?
It's a very difficult question. First of all, the Rebbe always wrote himself that what he counts as to one doesn't necessarily apply to the other. You certainly see within the Rebbe's counseling also components of talk therapy and allowing people to express their past. Story there in chapter 2 of an Israeli fighter pilot who says the Rebbe sat with him and had him for 45 minutes go through every single part of his time in captivity as a hostage until his release. And he says that he's never been heard in that type of way, and that allowed him to reconnect his story without fear and shame and guilt. Side anecdote, I was in a place called Oxnard, California, and I was repeating a story of Menachem Aini, the fighter pilot, and someone in the audience, an older Israeli, a professor at UCLA or something. He's like, I was in his battalion in the Air Force. He's a real person. I remember when this happened. So verified human being. He said he didn't know about the yeridah, but he remembered when his plane was shot down. That's just a tangent. But so that's an example where you do see the Rebbe allowing the past, and it certainly exists in the Rebbe's counseling. However, I will say that I think the overarching spirit is moving elsewhere. Now, it doesn't have to do with therapy or not therapy. You can do therapy in this direction. I think you can move in that direction as a therapist. Many of the people that I've been communicating with over the last few years, and especially the last few months, are professional therapists. Doesn't go into the conversation of, should you go to therapy or not. I think it's a general spirit of how to heal.
Right.
That makes sense.
Right. I definitely think, I'm just fresh out of Adama. My voice is like this because we had an Adama retreat that ended yesterday. I don't know exactly what happens that I lose my voice each time, but I somehow lose my voice each time. This time I think it was a breath work that I was in, and yelled a lot, and there was no other one that I yelled a lot in a breath work, and I also managed to lose my voice. So it just seems to be like a component of Adama that my voice gets lost. But during it, I was observing with one of the guys who I've known for a while. It's not the first time he's had Adama, and I've watched his journey, and he's gone very, very deep into his story. And as part of that, he's successfully, he's changed his life in a lot of ways, whether it's from, I don't want to say he was a drug addict. It didn't seem to be like an addiction to drugs as much as it was a lifestyle of drugs, women, rock and roll, and like that, such a lifestyle. And then moving away from that. But then when I was observing him over this past weekend, I thought that like it's time to really, really focus on purpose. Like, what was the purpose in his journey? And had a difficult childhood and a difficult life and a difficult marriage. And some people get one phase of their life, they get their butt kicked. He got his butt kicked from 0 to 40.
Oh.
So at some point in time, it seems like the arrow, like what I was saying for him, is you're never going to get to your destination if you continue to spin on your childhood, but you needed to in order to arrive at where you are. Would you say that characterizes you? I'll say characterizes, but that wouldn't be in conflict with what you saw from the Rebbe's work.
I don't think so. Like, for example, in that story, the pilot, at the end of the conversation, the Rebbe recommended that he write a book of his time in captivity, because there unfortunately won't be the last hostage of Israel, and there will be future hostages who will have an easier time navigating their own pain of their suffering as a hostage if they will have read your experience. So the Rebbe, in that yeridah itself, you see taking both steps. First, allowing him to reconnect with the story. And step 2, don't end there. Find a higher purpose.
Yes.
Now, in terms of when it's necessary and when it's not necessary, it's beyond, of course, it matters by the individual, and it's beyond me to say.
Right. That's an individual journey, right?
Yeah.
Of course, there's an individual journey. I think we had this conversation, some over email, some in person, but maybe it's along those same lines of that, the concept of Chassidic, which is often shared by the Rebbe. It's also sometimes used by his followers as a way to suggest avoiding problems in life. So, to me, the way I see Chassidic, and you go into it, is that it obviously cannot apply in certain situations. Just from my own experience, I always have to look at my own experiences. Certain truths that I've uncovered in my experiences, that they're truths that God has shown me. I don't know anywhere to say it. Like, those are my experiences. And when I say my experience, I'm not only talking about my individual experience. I'm talking about being, let's say, in rooms of recovery for 8 years and watching people get sober one after the next, and they didn't do Chassidic. They took a microscope on their addiction and the impulses and the thoughts and everything that went into it. And you see over and over in this way, there's a freedom that could be achieved through that. So to me, when I hear Chassidic, I don't even assume for a second the Rebbe is saying it is a blanket in all situations, but based on your work, maybe before you answer this question of Chassidic, which for those terminologies is new to them, it's to take one's mind off of something. Chassidic is remove one's mind, literally, right? So before we go into that, maybe it would make sense to explain what you did. What was the research that you did to arrive at the conclusions in your book?
First of all, I want to take issue with the word conclusions. The way the book is formed, it's not as conclusions. I was very conscious of the fact that it's, first of all, a very sensitive issue. And as Rebbe himself wrote, this is individual letters. It's like to abstract from individual phenomenon to make a law is a logical fallacy, right? You have the Rebbe writing to a bunch of individuals. You can't say this is his position. There are areas where the Rebbe said was very clear about his position, Eretz Yisrael or otherwise. Emotional health, only in very few places you see the Rebbe saying a statement. So I'd like to look at it more as, here are some of the themes, here's the spirit, here's principles that you see the Rebbe counseling many times, and I want to lay it out for you so you have access to those patterns in a way that you can take off the page and apply it to your own life without being prescriptive and saying, hey, this is what the Rebbe believes you should be doing right now, because there's no one gonna. So that's just a cautionary note. Yeah. But you asked about Chassidic, right?
Yes, exactly. No, so I asked before going to Chassidic, you started touching on it in your answer that you read some letters, but if you can explain what the research process was. So
it actually started from, the whole project started from more personal space. I wasn't planning on writing a book ever. And, young adult searching emotionally, searching intellectually, searching for something higher that would alleviate some of the natural negativity we many of us experience. We experience. I got you.
Yeah. And I'm fresh out of Adama, and in Adama, when people speak, we always say, like, when we speak, when you speak, and this is for them, I'm not saying it's a rule for life.
Yeah.
When you speak is as much as possible try to own your experience, right? That way we can connect. It feels different. So
Point
when someone
taken.
uses the words we or you, sometimes we say like, you know, you know, when you jump in the pool and you're freezing, you want to run out. No, you or me, you know, it's like I, when I jump in the pool and it's freezing, I don't want to
Yeah.
run out, right? So so we're always reminding people to speak from the first person. So I'm fresh off of that. When you
Point
said
taken.
we,
Yes, absolutely. So I found myself gravitating towards the Rebbe's letters. You know, I've learned the Rebbe's Torah before. I've even read some of the letters, but now I just found myself opening those volumes and reading page after page. And of course, I felt that the Rebbe responses the Rebbe was giving other people were mirroring the inner world that was emerging inside me. So I started reading more and more and more, and I started noticing patterns. There's patterns of advice, patterns of themes that the Rebbe clearly sees at the pillar of building a strong emotional psyche in a very unsettling world. So I started taking notes. Like, okay, here's this letter explains this idea. You know, today I found this letter that explains this idea in a new way that I haven't seen. It gives a new tip. It gives a new angle on it. It explains it to someone that's going through an experience I would have never thought, you know, that it aligns with that theme. And then some days I would find like a whole new theme that I never saw before.
Is there one place one goes to for all Rebbe letters? Like, can one get it in?
So I think the primary set that we're dealing with is Igros Kodesh,
It's the
which
Hebrew.
is it's the Hebrew and the
35 or
Yiddish.
so volumes.
That is 33 volumes, over 12,000 letters we're talking about today.
So you went through all those.
So I didn't go through all of those in this stage of the story, but a little further on, I'll get to that in a second. And there's also the English letters, which have not been properly or chronologically published. There's still like 10 volumes of loose letters. There's actually an app called Rebbe Responsa, which did a decent job of collecting those letters.
There's what?
There's an app called Rebbe Responsa, which did a decent job of collecting those
cool.
letters. Yeah, so that's one resource that became very useful. But so yeah, so back to where I was. So I started reading these letters, started reading more and more, and I started just taking notes, like a notebook of themes. And like, hey, here's this tool. And I started as I was reading more, I started crystallizing in my head the different tools that I see the Rebbe counseling in different ways, but are clearly the undercurrent of what he's after. And once I felt that I had pretty crystallized a few themes, I started trying to implement them in my own life and acting on them. And of course, then you see a whole new meaning and a whole new life to each of those ideas.
Yes.
And it slowly, you know, nothing happens overnight. But gradually I felt the magnetic pull that was pulling me out of that darker place that I felt and opened me to a new type of way of seeing the world, seeing myself, and a new emotional experience. And sometime in that time is when I had the idea to try to put it in a book and allow maybe other people to gain from it. I didn't realize how long that would take. But after that, the first thing I did was to double down on the research almost. Okay, like if I'm putting out a book on this, I should actually know the subject well. So I sat and read those volumes. I went through, if you want to know, for accuracy's sake, I didn't read every single letter, which means if I saw a letter was addressing, I don't know, a burnt shoal in France, so skip, or
Right.
discussion on a Gemara. But I did try to make sure that I went through everything to see to pick out the letters on emotional health and to have them noted. And then I started the next process of elimination of like taking all those that I amassed and trying to see what would be the ones that would communicate the themes that I already had a basic idea of and was working on for myself, that would communicate them in either the most relatable way or in the clearest way. And then to have all the other sources that I found in the end notes, which ended up growing. So that was, and then once I had that, then came to the question of how do you write that? And then, you learn all about writing, which is itself an animal.
So you learned about writing during this process?
Yeah, I didn't know how to write.
And this was pre-ChatGPT, so we know you did it.
Yeah. I had the privilege of having some very special editors. They did a very good job in, not letting me off easy and teaching me some of their skills.
When you say you didn't know how to write, you mean what? I mean, you had a command of the English language.
I probably learned a better command of the English language in the process. But also, I just had to form sentences and had to make sure they're clear and concise and what creates for that the things that are in your head and you see as interesting, the reader will get in less time, less space. Respect their time, put in the time to respect their time, and clean it once and twice and 3 times and 4 times, and make sure you're not being redundant, and you're getting them the most value for every minute that they're giving you reading. You should pack it in with as much as possible that they can walk away from. Just basic things like that, and be clear and communicate these ideas from the Rebbe in a way that's relatable. So that took time.
Okay, so you mentioned a couple of things that I want to go down. So one, you mentioned the Israeli pilot who was taken hostage, who the Rebbe spoke to, pulled out his story, and then said, write a book. When he said to write a book, was like of the lessons or the details of the captivity?
It seems like just a story, like a memoir almost. That's what I understand. Not lessons, like, no.
Right. Not just
I mean, I assume when someone's writing a memoir, they do write some reflections. But yeah, the actual phrase that I saw from the Rebbe that he repeated was like, write a book of your time in captivity, of your experience in captivity.
Got it. Did this letter, sometimes one can read a letter from the Rebbe, or maybe I would say in my personal sense, I can read a letter from the Rebbe. I'll take some of my own medicine. And I can read it in a personal way. Right? Like this is relevant to me now. And I've actually made certain decisions, important decisions, life-altering decisions based on letters that I've received. So, I took it as, okay, this is communicated for me in this moment. There's something there that's relevant. Did you read that letter in that way for you?
Interesting question. It happens to be, first of all, it's not a letter, it's an interview with him. It's actually someone who he refused to get interviewed ever again. Ironically, the way I knew about the story, remember the story, my father used to, all the Kfar Chabads that would come out, he had a thing that he wouldn't throw them out, he would keep them. So when I was a kid, I would like flip through them sometimes. And I remember the story of like a pilot. I guess it like inspired my imagination as a kid, a pilot getting shot down, meeting the Rebbe. And the phrase that I remember would actually nothing to do with writing the book. It was a different phrase the Rebbe told him, which is one of the things he told the Rebbe is what bothered him in captivity was the fact that he was together 24/7 and never had a minute for himself.
He was what?
That, of course, he loved the comrades that he was in captivity with and other non-Israelis that were stuck in the same cell as him for 3 years. He said he loves them. They're going through the same experience together. But nevertheless, he said he never had a minute to himself. Whatever he's doing, he said he tried to write a letter to his family. He's trying to write poetry. He's trying to read a book. The whole time he's with other people. And to him, that was very painful. You see also he's a thoughtful person, a private person.
Yeah.
So in his yeridah, when he was going through his time, and by the way, he says that he never said the story from that angle. He always said the facts. But this time he felt he's saying the emotional experience he had as he's going through captivity. So he said with very almost like a bitterness about that part of the story is that he was together the whole time and never had a minute to himself. And he said there was a pause, and the Rebbe remarked that yet, despite the togetherness, everyone was left with their own loneliness. That was the Rebbe's remark. And he says, today, so first he says, like, I looked at him, I thought, how does he know that? But what he said at the time is, I knew he was right. And today, 19 years later, so I guess this is the interview in the 90s, I sometimes think to myself that he would want me to find the path out of that type of loneliness, which is the deeper loneliness. That it's not that you're not with other people, that sometimes happens, but even though you're together with other people, you still feel deeply alone. So for some reason, that phrase stuck in my head. And when I was working on a chapter on the aloneness that the Rebbe addresses, God sent back a flashback to that story and that phrase. I'm like, that's exactly what I'm looking for to express what the Rebbe's. Only when I went back to the story did I rediscover that part that the Rebbe also told him about the book.
Oh, I got it.
And so what I'm saying is, it's interesting that was never the part. The part that stuck in my brain wasn't that; it was the Rebbe's remark.
Was the loneliness.
And yeah, so that wasn't. In answer to your question, no, that wasn't what inspired me to write the book.
Got you. So did that loneliness resonate with your personal experience?
I would say so. I would say, I don't know, it wasn't the impetus for writing the book, but certainly that phrase resurfaced in my mind many times between then when I read it first and when I wanted to, nothing to do with writing a book. It was a phrase that,
Right.
and,
No,
and
but
the
you
way
had
he
said,
took it, that sometimes today I think to myself that the Rebbe would want me to find a path out of that type of loneliness. I just remember his own reflection also on that remark. I don't know, it hit me. And yeah, I remember if I thought particularly about that story when I was going through my own experience. I honestly I don't remember if, you know.
right, I mean, the story, I meant the loneliness, meaning earlier you said that as this journey started with your own
Mhm.
inner exploration. I mean, the process started with you looking at your own challenges. So I was asking if loneliness connected to some of what you were experiencing that led you down the path of seeking the Rebbe's mental health
Absolutely.
guidance.
I would say more it was like the uh not the symptom is the wrong word, but it was the second. It was like it came along. It was the companion of just about any other emotion is you feel alone in that experience because you become more isolated in your own world. You feel that somehow, even though you have friends and life is good and you're having a good time in many ways, there's like a misalignment. Like you're talking to people, but you don't feel like you're communicating just because you're, absorbed in some kind of other energy that's pulling you down. So the sense of isolation and being alone, and especially with that concept, despite the togetherness, yeah, it certainly was the experience that I had. But I think it wasn't the propeller of it. It was more the companion of the experience. Am I saying clear enough? You know
Right.
what I'm saying?
Yes, it makes sense. Meaning, remember when I started going to recovery meetings? I still have the picture in my mind. So there was this little area in South Beach called the Sobe Room, okay? Called a permanent home for recovery on South Beach, the Sobe Room. And it was in an area, it's so funny because um, years earlier, my sister had borrowed my car. She was visiting and it got towed. And then she flew back to New York with the car key in it. And
Oh,
anyway, I don't remember exactly what happened, but I ended up needing to be brought to the tow yard, and I was there for a very long time. And it was this tow yard that was directly across the street. There was a few tow yards directly across the street from this sober room, permanent home for recovery on South Beach. And I didn't know what it was, but it wasn't in a very nice area, South Beach. And a friend drove me there, and I was waiting for a while. And I was like, let's hang out. Like I didn't know what was going on, but I just remember people pouring out of this little building, and it just looked weird. What was going on? I remember like I stayed in my friend's car for a while, like waiting for this to sort out. And then years later, I didn't know what was bothering me. And it wasn't like scary. I didn't know what was bothering me about the space. I would have had to stand right in front, but directly across the street from it was the tow yard. And I was waiting there for about 2 hours. And my friend and I hung out in his car for a while until we figured all the paperwork and the key and whatever nonsense that had to be sorted out for the tow yard. Finally, get the um, car back. Or I don't think they gave me the car back. I think I had to get it towed from there to a dealership. I don't remember the exact story, but I remember
mhm.
hanging out in front of this um, place called the Sober Room. And years later, I started coming there on a regular basis. And the first time I showed up, I'm like, I've been here before. Where was I? And I pieced it together that maybe 5 or so years before I had been towed at this exact space. In any case, in this little dingy building, in the rooms that I visited for, 8 years on a regular basis, it was a little sign. So like, you are not alone. And I remember seeing that, like, you are not alone. And it seemed to be a very central theme of those meetings and maybe the entire recovery process is that whatever we're dealing with, when we think we're dealing with it alone, it makes it much heavier. Meaning nothing, it didn't say I'm not an addict. It didn't say life is going to be okay. It didn't say, all the consequences that I was worried about dealing with are going to disappear. That wasn't the message. It had like a few words. What am I going to tell you? Like, you're not alone. Whatever you're dealing with, you're not alone. So yes, it seems to go hand in hand with many difficult experiences that if we feel we're alone, it makes the weight that much heavier. So I understand what you mean by companion of. That's what I'm saying.
Right, right, yeah,
Yeah. But it's a heavy companion
yeah.
of. And addiction recovery also, they always say like isolation is the enemy. Isolation is like, it's absolute the enemy. So besides for meetings, fellowship, call people on the phone, like the more you get alone in your own head, it's a very dangerous place to be. Our own mind is a dangerous place to be.
Absolutely. I think it's a central theme in the Rebbe's counseling, and actually it over the years it became more and more. On the tour somewhere, someone asked me if you see progression in the Rebbe's approach, like you see
That's
like
interesting.
development.
Yeah.
Because every intellectual, you're going to study an academic environment, you're going to like see if there's differences and, the ideas develop in new ways. So, it's an interesting question. It was like on the spot. I said, look, I don't know. Nothing like intense change comes to mind at this moment, like to think about it. But one thing that I do see in the Rebbe's counseling that continuously takes on more and more energy and more urgency is this idea of talking to other people. The idea of being Messiah. The Maven is a phrase Rebbe uses, a knowledgeable or understanding friend. Knowledgeable friend, I think I saw the Rebbe writing in English once. So it's both that they're a friend, they care about you, and second of all, that they have real knowledge of the challenge. Doesn't necessarily mean that they have some kind of paper. It means that they have gone through it and
Yes.
they've explored it, or either on their own skin or for whatever other reason.
Yes.
And of course, to have a mentor, mashpia. And in general, you see both in the sukhas, in the public talks, and in the letters, more and more and more increased in quantity and also like an urgency that the Rebbe urging people to consult with others, to have the humility. And the Rebbe gets into like the natural pushback we have. That's like, I know my problem more than anyone else. How could someone else like really understand it and really give me something that would talk to my problem? I know it more than anyone else. Let me think about this myself.
Right.
And the Rebbe like gets in there and it's like, yes, but you also can have a skewed view of yourself. And on the one hand, and on the other hand, people have gone through things and they might have wisdom for you that you may have not thought of. And just if you would, and the third thing the Rebbe emphasizes is that if you will make the first step, you should know that more than you imagine, people will respond and they'll be willing to help. And that consistently grows. Going a little bit back, if I can add something.
Go ahead.
To your question earlier about talk therapy. So I was speaking to someone and I was speaking about this theme in the Rebbe's counseling, which I bring in the end of chapter 11. It's such a powerful idea again and again and recurring. And they said, like, doesn't that seem a little bit out of spirit of like where the other chapters, other ideas are going more? It would feel like not, getting lost in your own, and something about talking conjures a different direction, if you know what I'm saying.
Talking versus
talking to others. Something about the phrase talking to others conjures, at least to this friend I was speaking to, he said, if that feels like, standalone or going in a little bit of a different direction than what I'm picking up from other parts of the book, from other parts of the Rebbe's
live
counseling.
your purpose, work.
Yeah, like but talking to others.
Okay, so this is very in line with the talk therapy. Okay, yeah.
That's what he was asking. Like,
yes.
Is it do you think it's a contradiction or it's two disconnected parts? It would seem to be going a little bit in a different direction, right?
Yes.
So I said, it's interesting because if now that I'm thinking of it and I look at the words the Rebbe uses, I think it's a little bit different than the phrases we're going to hear around. And that is, the Rebbe doesn't usually say talk to others. He usually says consult with others. And I think there's a very big distinction. Is the talk to others a lot of times has that idea of like unload on someone else. And there's power to that also. Don't carry it all on yourself, yes. Unload. But at the end of the day, you're coming to that conversation with like, let me get this off of my chest with the help of someone else, just like to unload on them. And in a certain way, you're still staying in your own isolated world. It's still an expansion. You're coming to that conversation to expand almost your world onto someone else in some kind of way.
Yes.
Consulting with others is a different act. It's an act of allowing someone else's hand, coming to the conversation with, maybe that person can enlighten me. Maybe that person can show me where I am and give me a more objective take of where I should be going or how I can do better, or tell me some of their experience. So of course you're going to share your experience. Of course you're going to have a real conversation. But the approach to the conversation is a little bit different. It's actually about getting out of your head and getting out of that, in a way, ego of I know my problem the worst and only I know how bad it is and only I can therefore really know
Right. It's definitely expanding beyond one's own
world.
Yeah.
And it seems that act itself of allowing someone else's hand to pick you up, of allowing someone else's perspective into your world with an open mind and to listen to them and to really consider their advice, is in itself therapeutic in the Rebbe's perspective, because it's part of that mind expansion, part of that getting out of your own world and allowing someone else. And I said, like, going back to his question, I think to me that idea of consulting with others really talks to the essence of so much of all the Rebbe's counseling is trying to do is really to move us away from becoming more and more fragmented and more lost within, entangled within our own island, and to connect us to the bigger community or the bigger purpose or the bigger or the divine.
Yes.
So that's just a thought.
That's interesting. Right. So you'd say,
why was I saying that?
You were connecting it to the first question I asked about talk therapy, like whether it's in line with the Rebbe, but you're saying the talk.
About being alone and connecting with others, that isolation is the worst thing.
Yes.
And that, and how the Rebbe developed, what ideas that the Rebbe developed more and more. One of them was talking to others, but with the emphasis of consulting versus just unloading.
Right. And therapy would be exactly that.
Would be what? Consulting.
Consulting. Yeah. That's what someone is going for.
Absolutely.
It's funny because I can't tell you how many times I've heard people say about therapy, like, why would I go? I'm smarter than the therapist, which is so irrelevant to the conversation. You may be smarter, but it has nothing to do with it. It's not, you're not looking for someone smarter. What you're looking for is actually someone with experience. Like for myself, I much prefer talking to someone who's had that specific challenge and overcome it versus someone who's just an expert on it. It's much more valuable someone who's actually been through that road than others. Like, for example, I see it, like, for example, like sometimes I'll have conversations sometimes with people about porn addiction, or either the person struggling or their spouse. And oftentimes you can feel like the overwhelm of the person, you know, how much it feels like it's a massive weight on their shoulders. But from my perspective, it's like I've seen this challenge before. Yet, like, it can feel like a massive monster. It can feel insurmountable. It can feel insurmountable to a relationship. It can feel insurmountable to an individual. And it's like, chill out. And it's not coming from, it's nothing to do with smarter, right? It just, there's experience. Like, I've seen this. I've seen it with myself. I've seen it with so many others who felt like they were collapsing under the weight of this sex addiction monster or porn addiction monster. And today they're more free. And what are those elements? There are usually a few elements that just completely change the conversation when it comes to this topic. And then someone else, a therapist who's dealing with a certain issue, they'd have to be not smarter. They have to be an absolute idiot for 30 years to be talking to people and not notice certain patterns as it relates to whatever it is: anxiety, depression, grieving, loss, you know, whatever topics they sit in. One of the things that struck me, and it's been a few months since I finished the book, one of the things that struck me was the importance of work, like work, go out and do things. God, I'm not even talking about like purpose. Just be useful.
Yes.
Right. Not, I want to find a purpose in my story, and like the soldier who then is going to use his story in a certain way. Yeah, for sure. Right. A lot of what I do with this podcast is that stuff, but no question. But I'm talking about just pick up a hammer and a nail, like do something.
The human need to be productive.
Yes.
Absolutely. The sikha that I referenced there, it's a long sikha about transcendental meditation. And the Rebbe makes two overall comments that he's talking about in that sikha. One point is the need to make it kosher, that it shouldn't have, remnants of Oriental Avodah Zarah traditions, or mentions like incense and other stuff. But then the Rebbe says another thing. He says And that's the main emphasis of the Sikha. If I go a step back, the Rebbe starts the Sikha saying that we see that the Avos, Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, they were shepherds. And the reason why they were shepherds is because sometimes it is important to leave the noise of the city. We see this in Yiddishkeit. I actually searched it up, who gives this interpretation. I found the son of the Rambam somewhere in one of his books. He writes this idea that that's why the Avos were shepherds. It's not like some obscure source.
I think it is an obscure source.
Yeah, meaning it's not like the Rashi saying why Avram was a shepherd, because he wanted to get out of the noise of the city to connect to Hashem. It's but that's what the Rebbe opens, and then the Rebbe says there's so many Jewish children, young people that are gravitating towards these things, and unintentionally or intentionally, or because only option, they're inhaling all this avodah zarah stuff, which is unnecessary because the essence of the healing is not connected to those practices. And therefore, the Rebbe was urging professionals and others to build a kosher alternative for transcendental meditation. That's the crux of the Sikha. However, there is a very strong other point the Rebbe makes, which is that he believes that it is not meant for ordinary individuals living their life. In other words, I never said this correctly, Adam Lamu Yivoli, the person is born to labor. It's a simple translation of the Pasuk. The way the Rebbe explains it in that stuff is as an axiom, not just, it's an axiom of mental health, that we are born and created and crafted in a way that we need to be productive to be healthy. There quotes a Gemara where Rava says that the water carriers of Mechuzah, some city in Babylon, when they would not work, they would get sick. They would get sick from not working. The day that they weren't carrying, they would get sick. In a certain way, that's true of all of us, that if we're in a healthy spot, and then we decide to let it all go and go to the forest or transcendental meditation, and which I guess many people were considering, is not only will that not heal you, that will make you ill. Then the Rebbe, however, for people that find themselves in a disturbed place mentally or emotionally, there's a nervous tension. I think that's the phrase Rebbe used, their nerves are stretched, something like that. And they need healing, right? So then this is a very powerful way of healing. We just make sure it's kosher. So that's a sikha. It's not about purpose. And I'm just saying, if you lose touch, if you're of that sense as being productive of working, it'll come to bite you in your mental and emotional health. So therefore, work is not just a need of I need money, but best thing would be just to sit and watch television or even read books. No, we have this innate need to work in order to be healthy. So yeah.
Yeah, fascinating. I actually interviewed someone, his name is Aryeh Siegel, who was a former executive at TM, the organization, when they were much larger, and eventually left that path, became religious, became Chabad. He wrote a book called Transcendental Deception. And
really?
Yeah.
The critique of transcendental meditation?
Yes. Yeah. It was interesting. And we had a podcast discussion talking about it, but somehow he said he only bumped into this instruction of the Rebbe about, I think he said 2014, 2015.
Mm-hmm.
They bumped into this, and he's an 80-year-old gentleman. It was in the 80s that he left TM, but somehow he didn't bump into it, and he just started working on implementing this
kosher version
of meditation, and having been in TM, both as meditating for hours, and then eventually teaching the work, and becoming an executive within the organization, he feels he knows the positive and the negative from it. But it was an interesting conversation on that topic. There's a writer named Michael Singer. Have you heard of him?
Singer? I've learned of him.
So he wrote a book called The Untethered Soul, The Surrender Experiment. Those are his two most famous. He's very well known in the meditation space. Extremely, extremely well known. Mostly coming, 99% sure he's Jewish, but mostly coming from Buddhist style meditation. And he writes in his books. He's an amazing teacher, an amazing writer. He's captivating. One of those guys, you pick up his book and you're done in 2 sittings. And he shared in his book The Surrender Experiment. He talks about this process of how in his 20s, I think it was, he decided to leave society and meditate. He started meditating in some place, and through a sequence of events, people started moving in, and people started coming near him, and then these meditation circles would open up. And for years, he was meditating, just like as much as he could, was meditating. And one time when he was meditating, he had an experience that he was trying to get towards the light. Right? Like he sees the light, and he's like going through, like a tunnel or a cave, or exactly what it was. Like, and as soon as he came to the light, there was what's it, like a cage or like bars over him. So he had reached the light, but he wasn't able to access it. And he understood from that meditation is not, like, he's not going to get where he wants to go just through meditation. And he ended up moving in a different direction. Not that meditation is not a part of his life. He still talks about it, but just that meditation is not it's not enough as a be all and end all. I think he took it more as a personal instruction because he definitely teaches meditation.
Mm-hmm.
But he ended up becoming like an executive or CEO of like a technology company through like interesting series of events or sequence of events, and like was very much in the physical world, and for so many years he was trying to escape. So I was just thinking about that you're talking about, that meditation. There's definitely a movement, like if you talk about the Buddhist movement, that I know people are into this, right? Like this way of life that, let's see how many hours we can meditate a day for. And the more we can be in that state and in bliss, the better. Here you're saying, like, that's the reason I'm bringing this up, is because it's definitely very contrary to a lot of ideas that are shared en masse when it comes to mental health.
Absolutely. And now that I'm remembering this, 2 points coming off what you're saying. Now remembering the Sikha, the Rebbe says that, of course, we do have part of our day. It's a halach on Shulchan Aruch that you're supposed to think about the greatness of God and the shiflas Adam, the lowliness of man, for davening. So we have not only are we pro, but it's a halacha to meditate every day before davening. But it's goal oriented. It's a goal oriented. It's to think about the greatness of Hashem and your shiflas Adam. You're doing it as an act, versus the idea of like letting go, like the transcendental meditation act of like retreating from the pulse and the rhythm of life.
Right.
That's the ill. That's what can make someone ill who's not ill. If you are in an unhealthy place, you might need that to get back to health. So that's one point that the Rebbe does say. Of course, Yiddishkeit includes elements of meditation, and it's halacha, but it's in a different type of spirit. It's in a spirit of movement, in a way, almost a spirit of action, of trying to connect the greatness of Hashem and trying to connect the loneliness of a person as part of davening, so you have a better davening, so you continue your day as a Jew. That's one point. And another point, which I think talks more to what you were saying a little bit earlier now, here's a letter to Shazar. Shazar was the third president of Israel, but he was also a brilliant author and writer and orator, poetic soul. And the Rebbe writes to him a long letter about the way a person can find alignment and peace in this world through connecting to the inner soul of the world, which is Elokos. And in that realm, the world is good and beautiful. And then the Rebbe adds 2 lines. It's interesting. Usually the Rebbe does not compare and contrast. It's almost something you have to do yourself. Like you have to study the ideas of Torah, the way the Rebbe presents them, and then say, wait, how does that compare or contrast with other ideas that are around? The Rebbe usually does not draw the line himself. But in this letter, the Rebbe says, and that will allow you or whoever to reach a state of menuchas nefesh, like serenity or peace of mind. The Rebbe says like this, V'loi menuchas nefesh kibnei haidu, and not the peace of mind or serenity, or I don't know how you translate menuchas nefesh, whatever, of the people of India. And I want to say the Hebrew here because, you can interpret it different ways, and I just want to say the Hebrew which is an Indian of hafsik ushvisa. Hafsik ushvisa. Maybe detachment and quietness, or people can interpret it in different ways. But the idea is it's
a term that they use constantly in that world is non-attachment.
Yeah, it's detached, right.
Yes.
Or non-attachment.
Yes.
So hafsik and shvisa, just coming to a place of stillness. I think I ended up translating the book as like detachment and stillness, maybe, or something like that. I don't remember. I remember grappling with how to translate those words. Ella, the menuchas nefesh of the Jewish type
Detachment
of menuchas
almost
nefesh.
sounds too proactive. It's like
Right, non-attachment. I got you. It's like Hasachadas.
Right.
Yeah, 100%. But what is it? Ella, menuchas nefesh of Bnei Israeli, like a Jewish type of serenity, which is aliyah michayel l'choyel, towards Ella toiva shleimus v'ayofi. That's the words, Rebbe, to the good, to the complete, and to the beautiful. I don't know, interesting phrase, but there makes a clear contrast at like the very bottom of it all, that there's a striving and aspiration to menuchas nefesh, but we're aspiring a different type of menuchas nefesh than the Eastern type of hafsikus shrisa, of detachment and stillness. We're aiming for a menuchas nefesh, a peace of mind in the Jewish way, which entails constant growth from strength to strength towards the good and the complete and the beautiful. So there is somewhere where you see the Rebbe articulating a clear
Constant growth?
halicha.
That sounds like
halicha
search for
mecha.
more.
Yeah, well, like you said, the Rebbe had played a big role in your life. Maybe that's where it came from. Yeah, like right. A lot of the detachment of the Eastern ideas is to let go from that need to search for more. Like,
Yes.
why don't you make peace?
Exactly.
All those expectations and all those stories you're telling yourself. Why don't you let go of any type of criticism, any type of aspiration, and just become at peace with the now and the present, and there's no past and there's no future, and all there is the moment because everything is suffering. Different ideas, and it's very powerful because it does bring. The Rebbe is not saying it doesn't work. It does bring a stillness, but it's a stillness that I'd like to think of it like there's a certain peace to a quiet sea. When the ocean is just quiet and peaceful. It has a peace. It's a very powerful peace. But I feel like we're Chassidus in this letter, when I saw it, it's like, hey, the Rebbe says this clearly, is where Chassidus and the Rebbe and is pushing is actually towards a water that's full of waves, that's moving, that's alive, that's vibrant. And in there is a different type of peace, different type of serenity than the still water. It's alive. It's almost stormy. It's like it's a heart that's beating, that's loving, that's caring, that's working. Another anecdote from the Torah, and let's hear what you're thinking. Someone asked me,
Another anecdote from the
Torah. This was in California.
Oh, the Torah.
The Torah.
Okay.
So someone asked me about happiness, and is that the phrase Rebbe uses? What does Rebbe think about happiness? I said it's interesting that you say that because now that I'm thinking of it, the phrase Rebbe uses actually probably endlessly more than happiness is joy, simcha, and joy. And I think the words do connote two different types of experiences. Like happiness, something a little bit more still about it. Like, joy has like an active energy to it. It's vibrant. It's ecstasy. It's alive. And I think there is a distinction there that really gets to the bottom of it. And this letter to Shasar really, to me, brought it together. So, yeah.
Right. I would say joy feels more encompassing. Like someone can be happy. Right? They're like happy. Okay, so there's feels like a part of something is like happy, and joy feels like
Right.
a state of joy. It's I don't know. It feels more like it takes over a person more. It takes up more. I'm happy, but you can't be like I'm joyful, but
Yeah, right. That's a good way of bringing it out. Absolutely.
Yeah. The Buddhist Jewish distinctions, I think, have to be drawn because it's interesting that you mentioned that the Rebbe clearly said that. I guess from the Transcendence meditation, the concept, although I've never done it, but the concept, as REC was explaining it, is just it's like having a mantra that most people don't even know what it means. He said it happens to be they were like Hindu gods, but they didn't explain it to people. They often communicated as a sound. And it wasn't meant to bring up any meaning. It was
The point is to get to a quiet place. Sorry, yeah.
Yeah, it's meant to, if anything, get rid of all thoughts.
Absolutely.
Right, when you're talking about thinking of the bigness of the Creator and the smallness of us, it's specifically thinking about an idea. It's contemplating an idea until the idea becomes
Right.
bigger.
Right. So
within
real
us.
Zen Buddhists would critically say that that's not what you're trying to do. It's going to different directions.
very different direction.
The meditation is to let go of just about everything, including yourself, and your ego, and your thoughts, and really reach a state of quietness or stillness. Versus, right, meditation there is to turn on your heart, to turn on your life, to turn on that blood inside you, and turn on the engine, not
Right.
to turn off the engine, and it's very different.
Yeah, it's definitely very, very, it's very, very different. And for whatever reason, that's been most of what's like the most common way of attaching to spirituality within America is actually through Buddhist concepts, which is a major failure on Judaism, especially considering the fact that so many of the leading Buddhists are Jewish.
Yes, absolutely.
Right. So it's good to draw a distinction. I have a friend of mine who's very into that, like those philosophies and those ideas and the non-attachment. And it's funny because he teases me about the name of the podcast. He's like, "Oh, we're not in search of more; we're in search of less." It's funny.
That's
Yeah,
exactly you're hitting
right.
at
So
the
you're saying
bottom
this.
of it.
It's that concept. Right.
Yeah,
there.
and I think some people struggle with that element of the Rebbe and health because the Rebbe is pushing for more. I feel like we spoke about this once. The relentless encouragement to grow mechayil chayil.
Yes.
And what this letter does, and I think that's really the heart of the conversation, which needs to be unpacked, is saying that's a type of menuchas hanefesh. I'm not saying I'm giving up on the serenity for the greater good of constant growth and constant production. It's like we're not saying, oh, let the whole company, feel miserable because there's a greater good of having, the goal in time, right? If done properly and sensitively and with the right learning and studying of the Rebbe's approach, I believe there is a deep and maybe even more appealing, when done properly, type of menuchas hanefesh that is found in the work, in the growth.
Well, it's more challenging for sure.
Yes, it's harder to square.
Yes.
But first of all, I feel like the joy that you get at the end is incomparable. If you just sit and relax. To use a very crass example, which I'm sure anyone who's into Eastern ideas would immediately, say that that's a horrible example.
Well, yeah.
And it's true. I'm saying this with respect to, but if you're relaxing and you're having, and there's someone who's working hard, even though you would say on a day-to-day basis that person would seem happier, more content, the person who's sitting on the couch versus the person who's stressing. But at the end of the year, I think you can compare the type of joy that they capture through building versus the person who's at the end of the year didn't produce, right?
Right.
But that's a very mundane example. I feel like that's about joy and satisfaction. I think there's a type of peace also. I think that's what's the deeper conversation, maybe more difficult to understand and unpack, is what is the menuchas hanefesh that comes within the aliyah mechayil chayil, within the continuous walk towards growth and search for more.
Yeah, I think.
I'm curious what you think. Yeah.
Yeah. So I have this idea around that Judaism. It's something I keep encountering. So I think it's central to Judaism, and I think it's probably highlighted by the fact, maybe like one way of capturing it is, let's take the sun and the moon as an example, right? Where some religions or some approaches is following the calendar of the sun, and some approaches following the calendar of the moon, right? Like Islam is just the moon, right? We count the moon every single time the moon goes. It's a month. When it goes through 12 cycles, it's a year, right? Very, very simple. Secular calendar, it's not meaningless. Sometimes my Jewish birthday is meaningless. My non-Jewish, your secular birthday is not meaningless because it actually happens at a specific revolution on the sun's axis, right? Every 365 days, the sun returns back to a certain state. And Judaism doesn't ignore the movement of the sun. Once every 3 years, it recalibrates itself to it. So it's not just like, some random date, January 27th. No, it took actual, like a point in time on the revolution the sun is making with the earth, and saying, okay, it was exactly at this place in that 24-hour period when you were born. But that's not enough for us in Judaism. Judaism does try to kind of do the impossible, which is say, I'm going to have a calendar that balances these two different things, the sun and the moon. And from that idea, I've expanded it to many different ideas. And I think in many different places, Judaism tries to kind of balance two things and says, okay, now I want you to walk on that tightrope. So I'll give you another example. So let's take in Christianity, the highest, they like transcend sex, right? So the priest, your job is to transcend sex. The Pope is like, so don't be in a relationship, don't have it. And then Judaism says transcend sex, but have it, right? It's like, we're going to do it and you're going to transcend it. So I think the same idea is with the concept of work. Like the Buddhist is saying, transcend work. How? On a mountain. And then Judaism says, transcend work, but don't transcend work on a mountain. Do it while working.
Yes.
Right? I think it's that.
Yes.
That's. I think there are many examples of
Yes.
this. I can probably think for a few minutes, like many different examples of this. But I think that's where Judaism is so much more demanding than other religions. And also Judaism is not for everyone, right? Judaism doesn't claim to be for everyone, but it's saying like that's our path. Our path is to be in it and transcend it.
Square the circle, yeah.
Yeah, actually, I originally came across this idea in a sikha. One of the ones that I was learning. So I'll tell you a story. So I was, there was a relationship in my life that was, like there's certain ones, they confound us. Do you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
There's certain ones. So I came across a talk by Y.Y. Jacobson. It was called, I don't remember what he called it, but he's talking about the journey of Yaakov going to Yisrael. Right, that name when he got it. So it was a whole story of Yaakov and Esav, and that before they met, he was preparing for war and for gifts. Right, it says he had prepared his armies. Esav had prepared his armies, and he was going towards him, and he prepared. He had an army with gifts and an army for war, or a group of men. And then when they met, it just says they fell on each other's shoulders. It's okay, like what ended up actually happening here? And I'll see if I can find a link, but it was something about when I see my brother's face, I see my own, or something. Like that was a title that I used, and in it he was explaining that like everyone has an Esav in their life, right? Like someone who's a relationship that's confounding, maybe our wife, and maybe a child, and maybe a parent, and maybe a sibling, and maybe a cousin, whatever it is, right? Maybe a business partner that just confounds us, like that we're continuing to go up against them in some way. And this process for Yaakov, that was Esav. Like he was this guy from his birth. It was the reason he was given his name. It was Yaakov, either because he tricked him or because he grabbed at his heel. And then eventually, through the course of his journey, when he finally went and did his deep inner work, because he says the only thing that happened between him preparing for the war and them falling on each other's necks, and I know there's a medrash that says he bit his necks, whatever, but what it looks like is that they made peace, right? Meaning the classic interpretation is that they made peace at that moment. And he says the only thing that happened, it says, right, that Yaakov was lying alone and he wrestled with an angel. So if he's alone, it was an angel. He goes to that. Well, obviously he was wrestling with his own internal self. And then as soon as he worked his own stuff out, then Esav didn't have issues with him. He didn't have issues with Esav. There was no reason for gifts. There was no reason for war, and they made peace. So he was talking about that process that sometimes relationships can bring us to that can confound us so much to force us to do our own inner work. Anyway, so it gave me some certain clarity on a relationship that was confounding for me. And I said, okay, like I have to extricate myself from this relationship. That was the idea. Okay, that I have to extricate myself from this relationship. And I did, right? I did completely. It was gone. It was over. It was done. I no longer had this person in my life. It was beautiful. Life was great. And then I come across the Sikha. And the Sikha talks about Yaakov getting the name Yisrael. But then at the end of it, like practically we call him Yaakov, unlike anyone else, right? So the Rebbe explains why. And he says that Yisrael is this idea of transcendence, and Yaakov is this idea of wrestling with the world, the mundane. And once we transcend, then we continue to work with the mundane just from a state of transcendence, which I took to me as saying, okay, like now that I've taken this person out of my life and I no longer have a relationship with them and I'm good with it, now I should have a relationship with them. Like now
that's a beautiful. So you're saying, going back to our conversation about the squaring the circle.
Exactly,
of the
right.
way.
The same idea. It seems to demand that from us.
Right.
You know, like a codependent relationship. Okay, get them out of your life. Okay, now that.
Yeah. Okay,
so you got them out of your life. That's Yaakov to Yisrael. Now you can live without them. Codependent. Okay, now bring them back into your life.
Yeah.
Without. And again, this isn't an individual.
Oh, that's a beautiful
message,
interpretation. Yisrael, Yaakov. I would never think of it in that way. I mean, Yaakov, Yisrael, Yaakov, in terms of like the steps of a relationship.
Yes.
You're like in
a fight with them, so you need to get a Yisrael name, but you need to retain. Then afterwards, once you got the Sarisa, your Yisrael, you can come back down to the Yaakov.
Yeah.
That's very, very interesting.
Yeah, which to me, like, that was right from the Sikha also, was the idea that, like, that's what we're named. We're named Israel, right? We're meant to transcend, but like be Yaakov, right? Like that kind of tension, it seems to be very central, at least to my understanding, the Rebbe's approach on Judaism is,
Right.
let's try to wrestle with and transcend at the same time.
Right. In the Eastern traditions, you're going to have a lot of talk about like becoming one with death.
Of what?
With death or with non-being.
Yes.
And just when you read those words, it's like the antithesis of the whole spirit of Chassidus in general and the Rebbe in particular. It's like about life. And somehow that to me, again, brings out something of that contrast. Are we trying to aim to non-being or in somehow living within the world and within life and still, and I think what's really the cherry on top, which we need to unpack and understand, is not only and nevertheless be calm or nevertheless be spiritual. It's through that you achieve a type of menuchos nefesh or a type of joy and a type of spirituality that is not possible to achieve without having the Yaakov end. It's not just despite that step, we will still have, we'll still maintain some. No, there's something you can only achieve through that.
Oh, interesting. So you're taking it even further, saying that the transcendence, which is true, actually, it totally makes sense. Because if I've transcended a relationship and my only way to remain in this transcended state is by not being in relationship with them, I haven't truly transcended the relationship.
Yes.
Right. And that would be the same with everything else. If if someone's going to make the argument that they transcended the world, but the moment they interact with it, they collapse under it, and what's their proof that they transcended? That they can sit on a mountain, right, all day long and meditate with very little food and very little company, right? They're fine. But then the moment they have either, they fall and you haven't transcended, right? So you're saying there's an even deeper level of transcendence that exists when you're interacting.
So I think that needs more unpacking, but that clearly seems in the Rebbe's worldview in general. But I think in the discussion that we're having today about the Rebbe's emotional health counseling, I think even in the realm of emotional health, or particularly, it's not that, even though we're going to grow from strength to strength, and even though we're going to be productive, we'll still be able to have the miracle of somehow maintaining a calmness without having to go to a mountain. No, it's more. It's that there's a different type of calmness and a different type of joy and a special type of joy and a special type of calmness you can achieve only through that continuous striving, that continuous search for more. It needs unpacking. I can't say I know for sure what it is, but I have like a vision of it. I have like an image of it.
Of what?
Of the type of person it seems Rebbe wanted to create, like a different type of joy, a different type of peace than just like a passive. They're at peace, but they're at peace in a very vibrant,
alive way.
And you see, like, people who are students of the Rebbe, and they embody this type of ecstasy and this type of love and passion, together with a peace, together with a certain serenity. But it's moving. It's alive. It's vibrant.
Right. I was actually I was thinking when this guy challenged the word more, my friend, he challenged the word like in search of more. So I was thinking about it. I was like, is there something to it that the search is for less? And I said, there's actually something when you have the word more. There's two components that I felt. One is that there's a humility in it, and a contentment in it, right? Which contentment may not be as obvious at first. Because if you're in search of more, that means you don't have it yet. So the humility is because there's more available, right? I'm not there yet. But the contentment is because wherever you're going to get to, there's also more there. So meaning there's not more because I'm not at the moment at the place I'm meant to be. There's more because there's always more.
How does that lead to contentment? Because you can rest assured that wherever you get to, there's more? Is that
exactly
the contentment?
Right, because if I say that, like, I'm at 5, but I need to get to 10, And then when I get to 10, everything is okay. So number one, that means like it can't truly be a search for more, because at that moment there's no more, right? Because you're trying to get to 10. So the in search of more suggests that there's always more. So there's more in this moment, and there's also always more. So because there's always more, I can be content in this moment. I mean, I'm pulled by two things. There's a humility that exists, but there's also the contentment, because there's the knowledge that even when I get to where I'm trying to get to, there's also going to be more than. So there's more now, there's more then. Like you're okay.
So explain more to me what the contentment in that is. I'm not sure that I'm getting the
What's the
contentment in knowing that
contentment in
even
that?
if you get to the next step, don't worry, there'll always be more.
No, meaning
Because
there's right now.
That seems to be very tiring. Like where do you see the contentment in that? Explain that a little more
No,
to me.
the contentment is now, not in then. The contentment is that right now, if I say you're searching for more, right? But there's an eventual destination where this no longer exists.
Mhm.
So right now I'm not at peace,
Okay.
right? Because I don't have what I eventually will get to. Versus I'm saying I'm playing an infinite game, and my goal is to get as far as possible. And I just got to keep moving and get as far as possible. But even when I get there, I'm still as far away as this moment, because I'm going towards infinity,
Okay.
right? So there's no...
You're not out of sync now, which you will be in sync later.
Exactly.
You're not like, oh, you didn't get yet to the exit that you're trying to get to. No, you're on this highway, and this
Exactly.
highway, and therefore you can already begin now to get comfortable on the highway, because
Exactly.
this highway is
Exactly.
you're going to be on this forever.
Exactly right. That's the idea, right? If you fully embrace the idea of more, like this Michael, you fully embrace, well, then you don't have to feel like I'm not where I'm supposed to be right now. No, you are where you're supposed to be right now, because where you're supposed to be doesn't have everything. So you have this hunger for it. So you're hungry for more, but there's also at the same point in time, maybe that tension is better said instead of humility and contentment. There's a hunger and a contentment at the same way. If you fully, that's what I mean. That's often like Judaism is. I feel like it's trying to, like, I'm going to put you on this pin, right? And I want you to like get comfortable right there.
Guess your terminate, you know? Yeah.
But now, yeah, 100%.
But it's interesting to me. You're seeing the search for more in the way you just described it. You know, I think to many, maybe even when you're saying those words, it sounds like, hey, but that could also lead to like kind of a futile, like you feel the whole thing is futile. Like, I'm always on this thing, and I'm always gonna be. So like, what? Okay, what's the point? Did you ever struggle with that type of thought?
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, it was actually something that I think it was like a space I went to from psychedelic journeys, which had this certain thought of this never endingness. I'm on a train I didn't choose to come on, and I can't get off no matter what I do. You know? And it was scary, very, very scary. It's like, hey, look, we're on this train. We don't feel like we opted in, and there's no way off. It can feel, there's a level at which death or suicide or whatever, some form of death can feel like getting off. I don't have to mention suicide. There's a level at which death can feel like I'm getting off the train. But I think for many people, worldview, death doesn't. Maybe it even makes us more conscious of how much we're on the train.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
If anything, like life may be the period of peace to some degree.
Right.
It's like we're not so conscious of the eternal nature of the train we're on. And it's very scary. Very scary.
How did you get out of that thought? Or
I get out of that thought.
what happened there?
I'm not sure. I'm not 100% sure. Not 100% sure. But maybe there was a thought that, let's say, is there someone who's perfect at chess? Is there someone who's perfect at basketball? Is there someone who's perfect at anything? Is there someone who's perfect at business? Is it like, these are all disciplines that we say that really it's infinite. Chess is a very small game, it's like a foot by foot, and it's infinite, right? Getting good at basketball, it's infinite. Getting good at baseball, it's infinite. What can you do? You can keep going. And you imagine if you came back to the world in 150 years and they're still playing basketball, people will have perfected things in some way that they can't do today. I mean, if you watch a game of basketball from the 1980s, whatever, 1970s, they're not moving at the pace or the stuff that's happening happening today. This doesn't. It's just different. You know, Tom
Right.
Brady is playing football till 45. LeBron James till 40. Right? There's a whatever it is, science or skills or anything else. There's just a different level. And still in baseball, they're still missing 7 out of 10. The good ones are still missing 7 out of 10. In basketball, the good ones are still missing 1 out of 2. You know, so the thought was, okay, if there's an infinite nature to that game, there's an infinite nature to this game. Like, why would I think that these narrow parts of the world have an infinite nature, and then like life itself isn't
Mm-hmm.
an infinite game we're playing also,
Mm-hmm.
and we can think about it and twist our head for a long time. I guess that's why the mind's a dangerous place if we stay there too long.
So as you're speaking, I just had this memory from yeshiva of like a little bit abstract here of learning in Chassidic. It says that when you go abstract intellectually, that's where the same logic can lead to opposite conclusions, and both of them are logical. And the example this brings is in Chomesh Bereshis. So Hashem says that He's bringing the Mabul to destroy humanity because Yitzhalev Adam Raman Urav. Look at this guy. People, they're bad from the core. They're bad. You know, Emcha, like I should wipe off the face of the earth. That's what the pasuk says. You read a parsha later when Hashem, Noach and whatever, and the Eibishter, reconciles with the world, whatever that means, and he uses the same, almost identical words that Torah uses. That, oh, what am I letting this out on humanity? They're bad from birth, what, like forgiveness, like, they have from birth, they have this instinct to this. So what do you want from them? Like, so it's the same logic led to two opposite conclusions, and both of them made sense. That on the one hand, you're able to see that idea that a person's bad, has a
innate negative tendency.
Yes, as a reason to destroy humanity, as a reason to overlook everything they do.
Right.
So why am I saying that? Because I think the understanding the infinite can both lead to despair and to immense motivation at the same time, depending where you take it. And I feel like, at least I know this a little bit for myself, is that a big part of what I get from the Rebbe is the excitement of the infinite, the excitement of the endless search for more. The excitement, and the phrase that's in Igris a lot, which connects with exactly what you said, is Ma'alim B'Kodesh, that there's a tzivli to be Idol B'Kodesh, and very often the Rebbe adds in letters, and since we're talking about Kedusha, holiness, which is connected to Hashem, who's Ein Sof, who's infinite, so therefore the Ma'alim B'Kodesh is an infinite, literally the phrase is therefore it is also infinite. But that said, with the whole vibrancy and the whole like absolute motivation and life and vigor, it's like, imagine you're on a highway that ends, but this is like an endless highway. Like it goes and goes and goes, and like it's unbelievable. So to see that same idea and to find life in it, and the same thing with like Bittul, or like to find the vigor and passion and emotion and the absolute ecstasy of that experience of like Pshittos and infinity is something that I get from the Rebbe. And I think it could just as well have been going exact other way. Like, oh my gosh, this is infinite. Oh my gosh, this is not going anywhere. Just forget the whole thing,
Interesting.
So that's where I was going with that, is that I now that I'm thinking about it, it can go exactly both ways, and both of them make sense. And the question of how you will see it depends on the educator or the Rebbe that you have in your life that's teaching you to see that as a fire instead of seeing it as a death,
right?
As a futile. What's the Sisyphus's the myth of Sisyphus, where he it's like one of the Greek stories where he pushes some guy was condemned to hell, and the way it played out was that he was supposed to push a heavy rock every day to the top of the mountain and then roll it down, and then do it again every single day. And the absolute horror of that.
I was doing the same thing over and over.
And he had to push it down himself. Like that's it. That's his life.
That's forever.
Yeah, the endless circle of Sisyphus. So it's like a mythological concept. So that's like the most futile way of someone can say about the infinite, and it could sound that way, or someone who sees the life and the godliness and the lakus of that, and you see it as the most exciting type of life possible. And that's, I feel, something that I myself I go back to the Rebbe to get that
Oh, it's as you're saying this, it's reminding me of, because when you asked me like, how did I eventually get out of it? Right? How did I eventually get out of this loop? So there were a couple of loops that psychedelics took me into that were very scary and dangerous. And I don't say dangerous, but yeah, like in my mind was, very, very uncomfortable, and not just during the experience, also afterwards. Like I wrestled with this. And in addition to this one, the endless nature of things, the infinite. Another one was that it's all created in my mind, right? That it's not real. I'm living in a simulation that's all of my own making. And I think in Judaism there's some ideas, right? That it's a false world, right? Like, what does this mean? Like there's something about it that's not 100% real in some way. I had this idea that when it says that by Matan Torah they heard what was normally seen and saw what was normally heard. So on psychedelic journeys, I've had that experience where the physical world feels distant, kind of the way the spiritual world feels now, and this spiritual world feels close. So the spiritual world is seen and the physical world is heard.
Right.
And so like Matan Torah was like, I got the regular experience of they saw what they normally heard and they heard what they normally saw. Anyway, like that's what it was. They were transported to a space where the spiritual world is what felt very, very real, and the physical world is what felt very, very distant.
Mm-hmm.
And then from that space, it can lead to a futility. What's the difference? What I do, this whole thing is made up. It's of my mind. It's a dream. Like, why should I work so hard? And it can spin on this. And then at some point in time, the peace that I found in it was that I cannot fit the world into my brain. And the way I arrived at this, I said, like, if I was trying to experience chocolate cake, I wouldn't try to do it through words and through my brain, right? I'd have to eat chocolate cake.
Mm.
But then if I have the world, I'm trying to fit the whole thing into my brain versus say, like, let me experience all of it. Forget this guy for a moment. Can I figure it out? Does it make sense? Does it not make sense? Is just experience the world as it is, I'm standing out there. It's a beautiful day. It's sunny. There's a breeze. I'm hanging out with my kids. Just had a nice meal. I have friends over, and it just feels nice. Like, is it real? Is it not real? Is it going to go on forever? Where does this train end? That's not the experience that I'm in, right? That's me trying to collapse the whole of my experience and put it into my brain. It's me and you talking about chocolate cake for 30 years versus both of us just eating it.
So that took you out of...
Yeah, it took me, like, I don't need to... Prior to that experience, I felt like I needed to make sense of everything. If I didn't have a good answer, if I couldn't answer a question properly, then if there was something unanswered, it was unfinished, and I couldn't move forward. Versus like teku, like some questions can remain unanswered. I don't have to fit the whole of human. Who told me I have to fit the whole of my experience in my brain when the brain is just another one of the created organs?
I got it.
Right,
I think I got it. I don't know.
I'll give you another example.
Like, who told you that that your brain is big enough to absorb what the tangibility of your experience? You're saying, like, yes, there's the eating the chocolate cake, so maybe the brain can match up to that, or maybe it can't. But the fact that you're eating chocolate cake is the starting point. Is that a saying that?
Yes.
I'm just trying, that's kind of what you're saying. Meaning, we're assuming that our mind is bigger than eating the chocolate cake, but who says?
Exactly. Yeah. Meaning, it's, would you rather discuss the chocolate cake with me, who's ate it, or with the guy who made it?
Right.
Or with the guy who understands all the chemical compounds of it, right, and the structure, and can tell you all the different taste buds in your tongue, right, and how they're firing.
Right.
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 Who would you rather talk to about the chocolate cake?
Right.
Or would you rather just eat it? Because the guy who just ate it is going to tell you to eat it.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Like, everything else is not going to be so relevant for a few minutes when we just eat it. I'll give you another example of this where it maybe hit home personally. So when I grew up, it was very common when asking about another human being, what do you think of them? You've heard this question? What do you think about them?
Mm-hmm.
Right? And I think it's a stupid question. I think much more as how do you feel? A much truer experience of a person is not what I think of them. It's I've just sat with them, and what's my experience of them? Like what do I feel? What do I feel? I've just interacted with this guy. I've tasted him, right, so to speak, for a couple of hours. How do I feel? I think that's a much more accurate. I started using it in interviews, business interviews. The resume, resume is a much smaller component of working with someone. Let me sit with them. Let me take him in. How did I feel afterwards?
Right.
So now instead of asking what do you think of that person, I can say what was your experience of that person.
Right. Yeah. And yeah, but the mind change. And by the way, just because this is a discussion in Igorist, you have this a lot where the Rebbe is trying to encourage people to not try to experience Yiddishkeit. Just do me a favor. Just give it a month and just say, I didn't figure this out yet. I don't know how to square this with everything all the other cultures or worldviews that I've studied. But just give it a month and try to experience Yiddishkeit. Please make the leap, and then we'll come back.
Right.
Because and kind of what he keeps saying is that it won't bring you to the same place. It's not like if I figure out every corner, I'll end up in the same place of the experience. No, the experience moves on its own frequency, and it talks to you, and you experience it in a different way, which maybe your mind could catch up with, and maybe it will never catch up with.
Exactly. In recovery, there's in the 12 steps, they have one of the chapters in the book is called How It Works. So oftentimes, like the old timers, the people are there for a while, and there's certain sayings that go along with it. So they say the 12 steps tell us how it works, not why it works.
Right. Good. Yeah. Exactly.
So I'll tell you why just to go back a little bit in the conversation about meditation and the difference between Buddhism and Judaism, and why I think it's very important. Maybe a second book for you once you write your third book, because the memoir has to come also. But I'll tell you why it's important. So let's take Transcendence meditation as an example, right? So the general criticism of it was it's avodah zarah, right? It's avodah zarah. So, and I think avodah zarah, like I like every time I hear it, I get like a little bit bothered by it, because I feel like someone's saying a word they don't understand. They don't think they need to explain it to me in a way that I need to understand. Mm-hmm. I'm just supposed to believe it's bad for me, and you think it's bad because the word sounds bad, and we're like, we're done. But if we break down the word, it's like this is a service that's foreign to us. This type of service is foreign to us, right? That's what it is. They say Transcendence meditation. You say, okay, you want to like practically, okay? The guy is chanting, and the guy is this, and the guy. What is so bad? Tell me what's so bad. Tell me what's so bad. It's bringing me peace. It's making me feel better. And I think over here, the way you're explaining it is like it may make you feel better, but there's a dead end at the end of this. Right? Yeah. Actually, practically, what I'm saying is like if you keep taking this road to the end, you have a road that's a dead end, because you have a guy sitting at the top of a mountain, not doing any work, and he's not making any kids either.
Right. I will say though, I think just what I think in terms of what the Rebbe was saying, I think this is an important axiom in general when it comes to the Rebbe, is that this may be a true interpretation, but at the bottom line, almost like what you're saying about experience earlier, for the Rebbe, there's a halachas of avodah zarah, which means if something is rooted in pagan practices, even if it would end up in the same place, it doesn't matter. Before we understand what's the problem, it's prohibited. It's prohibited to do a mantra that roots back to a pagan god or a goddess, and that's what you're singing to, not in a very distant way. That's exactly what the mantra is about. And you're singing a name of a god, and you're calling on them to heal you. That is usher. From a halachic perspective. Now, I think we can add interpretation to why that is and what is the difference in energy and where that goes. I'm just saying, in terms of the reasoning for the Rebbe's insistence on kosher meditation, I think it begins and maybe even ends. Not ends, but in principle, the most driving force is simply this is not Jew. It's not halachically allowed. That there's a whole world to think about that. Of course, Yiddishkeit, even the Rebbe was the biggest component of the Rambam that says even the non-rational mitzvahs we try to rationalize, try to understand. There's an endless world to think about that. What is the pagan God? What do those gods represent? What are you calling on them? What are they bringing in? What is the Jewish relationship to Hashem different? Where is it going? But why is it something we should purge the meditation or otherwise from? Is because we have a Shulchan Aruch that says that this is problematic because it's rooted in pagan practice.
Right. I'm not saying otherwise. What I'm saying is that, first of all, that's not always clear what is and what isn't, right? So, for example, if someone says transcendental meditation, they'll say, okay, so I'll do meditation without the mantra. What is the problem? What isn't the problem?
Right.
And oftentimes, so what an approach has been for many years is just throw out the whole category. So don't throw out transcendental meditation, throw out meditation. Anything that smacks of anything, just get rid of.
Right.
And I think the Rebbe was saying a different way, my understanding is you got a problem on your hands, right? The problem is that you're not the only one making the decision of what to do with their life. So is the person who's living his life.
Yeah.
So if you want to throw out the whole of meditation because of transcendental meditation, and there's some avodah zarah that's in there, then what you're going to end up having is the only meditation in town is going to be the transcendental meditation. And the guy who's looking for peace is going to have that. So we do have to understand at the end of so my understanding of the Rebbe's thing, or the Rebbe's message is let's understand what is and what isn't, two things, problematic, and what is and what isn't essential to the healing practice. Because if you can go to someone and say, listen, you're going there and it's amazing and you feel amazing. And I just want to let you know that the reason you do it is because of these 4 ingredients. These other 3 are completely unessential. And try it out, right? See it without it and see what happens if you don't chant to the pagan God. Right. You still get the same level of peace. You can still get to the same level. So I'm not saying that we need a reason not to. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that we don't have to avoid thinking about a whole category. We can actually dive in, and then we can explain it in practical ways as much as possible. So here, if we don't do that, then you're also not explaining. So what's the harm in it? What's the harm in going down that path? So for someone who follows halacha, great. Okay, so they'll do that thing. For some people who that means a lot too. Okay, I'm not going to go down that path because of this. But for others, like make it make sense. Make it make sense.
Absolutely. And not only that, in that sikha, the Rebbe says, "Oh, people say, what do you see?" I think it's Yud Beis Tammuz. You're sitting Yud Beis Tammuz and you're speaking about what you're saying. What this is like. He's like, "What do you mean? There are hundreds of thousands of Jewish boys and girls that are finding themselves, and nobody in the Jewish community cares to give them an alternative, and these are things that heal for people that need it. So, why are we speaking about this? There's a ticking bomb. There's Jews that are being lost to Yiddishkeit because nobody's giving them an alternative. And I think what you're saying is very very powerful. That saying you don't need to be scared to get into the weeds and make an alternative that's Jewish.
Right. That's what I believe the call to action is in all these categories.
Right.
Whether it's yoga, people shared this transcendental meditation thing with me like early on as I started working with psychedelics. They're like, here, look what the Rebbe says about this. I said, okay, listen, I watched this 10-minute clip that Jem put out, and I haven't heard him knock one person who went to transcendental meditation. That wasn't the call to action.
Absolutely.
The call to action was not don't go. The call to action was to create Jewish meditation centers. Like if you look through the whole thing, the travesty was not that, the call to action was not for the people who are going not to go. I don't even think the Rebbe thought he would get through to them. The call to action was for the people who follow him, create centers that are as good or better, and then why wouldn't they come to you?
Absolutely.
Why wouldn't they come to you?
I will add one thing, just you're saying Jewish meditation, an interesting point that I think deserves unpacking of its own, and I don't know myself the interpretation. In the correspondence Rebbe had with a few professionals after, and I think maybe even in the Sikha, Rebbe insists that it should be kosher meditation and not Jewish meditation, and it should not include any Jewish mantras or meditation on Jewish ideas. There's a letter where someone writes they want to make a mikvah, they want to part of the bath or that going to the or whatever the word was, so they should call it a mikvah. So they give it a Jewish feeling. And Rebbe said no, he doesn't want it to be called a mikvah. It should not include Jewish terms. Don't try to make it Jewish. Don't try to make the Shema.
Yeah, don't
try to make the meditation Maida'ani. Make it neutral. make it kosher, right? There's like challah, and then there's like just a kosher pizza. Like it's a kosher pizza. Trying to make a kosher pizza.
Pizza, not challah. Okay.
Not challah. And it always was interesting to me because, if you look in the Rebbe's broader counseling, the idea of the foundations of Hashem and Yiddishkeit are not like separate. The Rebbe does see them as elements of health. He doesn't, in general, the Rebbe doesn't disassociate. He more, finds unity between the soul and the emotions and the body and your life as a Jew and your life as a human being. How they all feed off each other and complement each other. It was always interesting to me, like, why not? What's the problem? And it's an insistence. Like, the other people are like, I have this whole vision. Let's make this, Jewish meditation. Let's use our own ideas instead of, they were like, no, I want it to be neutral and kosher. And that's it.
Yeah, from what I've seen about psychedelics, I'm glad you, from what I've seen on psychedelics, I agree with it 100%. Because I've seen,
yeah, I'm curious how you see it.
I've seen certain people like say, okay, let's do slichas and ayahuasca. Let's do Shabbos meal and ayahuasca. You know what I mean? It's like, let's not.
Yeah.
Like, let's do healing in ayahuasca. And let's keep the Shabbos meal, and the slichas. Like, it's very easy to say, like, no one's ever davened before, I heard someone like, I feel like I've never prayed like I have on mushrooms. Okay, congratulations. But if you're following basic Jewish law, you're not supposed to pray on mushrooms, right? I would say there may be a prayer that comes out, but like, don't put in your tefillin on mushrooms. Like, you're following basic Jewish law. And they probably said it for a reason. I think that there is a tendency to want to like rush into this, and like, this is where true spirituality exists because it feels like it. It feels like it. But back to what we were talking about before is like, no, try to bring that feeling where you don't have that.
Right.
Where you don't have those
those
access
I agree with
points.
you 100%. It's much more than I do, but the little that I've seen is it doesn't really contribute to the healing, but it certainly does a lot to distort Yiddishkeit. And not certainly, I take that back. That's too much of a statement. But it a lot of times just creates very vague or different view of what like a Shabbos meal or a davening is, which can lead to, instead of increasing of healing, really watering down and like a loss of concrete meaning to certain Yiddishkeit points that are central.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it felt very, very often. Certain people going into ayahuasca ceremonies with the talis, like, chill out. For me, it was chill out. Like, I'm here for healing. I'm not here for my, especially granted that comes with it. Then the suggestion, like, to mix in all the Jewish stuff. No, let's mix out the non-Jewish stuff. Like a guy that I did a lot of ayahuasca with, and I got comfortable with him, is he comes from an Islamic background. So ayahuasca is mixed in cultures where Christianity is very prominent.
Okay.
In general, right? So if you go to South America, where Christianity is all over has spread its wings, very widely in South America. So a lot of there'll be sometimes songs to JC. There'll be like different stuff that are just mixing in Christianity within ayahuasca. This guy, he's Islamic, and he went and he spent whatever it was, 8-10 years working with a bunch of tribes. So when he came back to serve the medicine, he stripped out all of the Christian things, and he didn't bring Islam. He's like, there's one God, and I'm not, right? So he served it in a very, it wasn't, I don't want to say it wasn't spiritual, but all of those things, I'd sat with a couple who were very in that way, and I felt like I was getting a lot of unnecessary stuff mixed in. And from him, I felt like everything was mixed out.
Right.
It was just, here's the medicine, lie down on the mat, have your experience. I'm not here to introduce anything new to you or any different ideas in a susceptible form. They're just, here you go. And I felt much more comfortable with that versus others. And then I know there's kind of the third way, right? So if the third way is like bring a lot of Jewish stuff, and I always resist it. It's like, no, I don't want the talis and ceremony. I don't want the all the Jewish stuff. So it's interesting you're mentioning that, the difference between kosher meditation and Jewish meditation.
And it's not just a diuk that I'm saying. It's the Rebbe's insistence. There are people that are like saying like, and they're like all enthusiastic about it, and you could almost feel in the letter they're like, sure, the Rebbe would love that idea,
right?
And he's like, actually, no. And it's like, why? So it's interesting that you're seeing the way that actually plays out. So
yeah, I saw it
it's
first.
Remarkable. It's like it stands out. It's like, wow, that's so interesting,
Right. It's interesting. I'll talk to Okay, it's interesting. I won't mention it on here, but I'll tell it to you offline of someone who's going into this healing path and is struggling with some names. But I think to keep it healing is healing.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Can we talk a little bit about? I think if someone saw you coming on and they said we're going to do a podcast with Levi Shmotkin, so you're talking everywhere, right? Meaning in many different places. You're on a tour. So if there was something that someone would expect from knowing that you came down here, is they would understand a little bit of your story. If they sat down to, I don't want to do false advertising. It's like, oh, it's an In Search of More podcast with Levi Shmotkin, and you shared your book, which they can get in many different places. But if we can hear things that someone would expect from here, is there's always an individual journey that leads one to their purpose. There was, I spoke, Mendel Commonson, who wrote
On Purpose.
On Purpose.
Yeah.
So I haven't read it yet, but he copied it 2 pages. He said the longest letter the Friedrich Rebbe wrote was to a guy, the name is escaping me. I read the name. And in it, he spoke to the guy about 10 elements of their life. He says something about something with the word told us, that like someone has to know their story. And the Friedrich Rebbe spelled out 10 elements of a person's life that one should seek to understand as a way to find God's purpose for them in the world, or God's mission, where they were born, their parents they were born to, the specific way they were raised, whatever, different things. So Mendel Commonson he spoke about it on the podcast, and he shared with me these 2 pages from his book. I still haven't read the book itself, but the point is that if someone is in line with their purpose, then they likely dug into their past a little bit and their story. So I'm interested in some aspects. You referred to some loneliness, you referred to some mental health challenges that eventually forced you down this path of research and then eventually writing a book. But there was a personal journey here that you then found solace and answers to. So I'm interested in how much you're willing to share with us on that front.
It's funny, actually. On the tour, I wrote this to you before. On the tour.
Yeah, bring the mic a little closer. Yeah.
How do I?
Over there, just push it down from the back like this. Yeah.
Well, got it. I did sometimes speak a little bit more personally, and I used to give an introduction from a conversation we had, saying that I was speaking to a friend, and he was encouraging me to speak personally when I speak to people, and I was telling him that, well, first of all, it's hard to speak from your kishkas, but second of all, it's not that I'm like withholding some kind of dark story that I don't want to share. I don't feel like I have much of a story. My story is just everyone's story, in the sense we're used to it, especially in the realm of emotional health, talk like hearing an episode with some graphic details, whether someone did something to someone else or some type of story happened that really obstructed someone's life and led them to immense pain, and that or an addiction and some kind of really horrible situation or horrible pit that someone found themselves in, that there's some graphic way to describe that, or some graphic episode, or some concrete story.
Mm-hmm.
And I think a little bit I know from your story, a lot of the journey began with something a little bit more tangible, a series of episodes that began on a physical level. And I was saying that I don't, thank God I had a good childhood, I had good parents, I had good friends, good teachers. Thank God, I don't, but, and really the story is an internal story, nothing dramatic details to share that I'm hiding, that I don't want to say. It was an inner story, which I think is so many of us have, where you grow up and you become a person of your own, and that comes with turbulence and your sense of self that's finding itself and especially if you're thinking and you find yourself in yeshiva and you're like every day learning Gemara and Chassidus, and then you have this whole person emerging in you, and you have thoughts about yourself and thoughts about your future and thoughts about where this is all going. And then a lot of it also had I remember this vividly, I would have the luxury to have this type of turbulence when I'm 13, when I'm 14, but at 19, 20, you got to have it figured out by now. So it came with like a fear, like, oh my gosh, and then a sense of isolation. But so I would tell people, I was telling my friend, which is you, going back 2 months ago or whatever, that I don't think this is a story that people are interested in or that is worth sharing, not because I'm hiding something, because it's not much of a story. It's an inner story. It's an inner story of pain and redemption or liberation, and not a particularly episode pointing, detail-oriented story, narrative. And I would say that this friend, i.e. his name Eli Nash, told me that he thinks particularly for that reason why it is important to share, because there's a specific type of pain that's unspoken about people that don't have an episode to point to, and they just have that turbulence that comes with being a soul and a human being in a very unsettling world and finding your path. And maybe people would resonate, particularly because there's nothing extreme about it, particularly because there's nothing, off the grid about it. It's the experience so many of us have without an outside episode or catalyst to point to as something concrete. So just so you know, every time I shared that at a crowd, almost like a force of gravity, people's heads would shake. Like, yes, when you say something like yes, absolutely. So that's just a little throw in over there. But so back to the point is that it's not that there's a major story here, but it was a journey more inwardly, not inwardly. See, it was an inner journey, meaning there's a time of very real pain. And I remember feeling, it did have physical symptoms. I felt very heavy. I've lost appetite. Heavy, I don't mean like lack of energy. Yes, weighed down. Like I'm carrying something. Like I'm carrying myself, dragging. I felt like I was dragging myself somehow. I felt, I lost my appetite. I remember this clearly. Like I'm not interested in eating. Like, but it wasn't like nothing clinical. I mean, I don't know. Whatever. It doesn't matter. But I'm saying like, I ate. But like, I remember feeling like the natural, like like I'm starving, bro. It didn't like have that, or at least oftentimes didn't have that. I even remember that somehow I was like, once in a while I would find myself in my bed and just crying. And like, hey, like, this never happened to me. Like, what is this? So it was like it was very painful. It was a very painful time. And like, I knew that I had to find something here. Like, it wasn't just gonna, I actually remember in the beginning, I like tried to double down on social life. And all along, by the way, a good friend, like I've no one and nothing to complain about. Thank God. It's like try to double down on social life and like, maybe like kind of party more, like Farbrengen more, and not for whatever, have a better time and just hang out more. And like, and I remember coming back from that feeling in a way more alone, not because anyone there, just because like you're putting out your energy and you're somehow hoping for the energy to come back to you and like lift you up, and it's not working. So you feel even more like despair is maybe the word. Like,
I tried one more thing that didn't work.
I threw my energy out. I thought it was like gonna come back, like, and it just didn't. Like it didn't manage to pull me out of this.
Do you remember when you were in this place, whether there was this voice in your head of, why do I feel this way if nothing that bad happened to me? Was that part of the...
I certainly was asking, why don't I feel this way? I don't think I probably didn't have the second half of the question. Right. Like, if nothing, I didn't have like,
okay, no.
Why am I feeling this way? Absolutely. What's wrong? Like, what is this? Absolutely.
Right. The reason I was asking that is because sometimes that adds an additional weight that someone has to carry. Like, why do I feel this way? That's one question. But then someone doesn't give themselves permission to feel it because nothing that bad happened to me.
Right.
Like, I know this guy who, he had a story from hell. But me, like, what do I have to complain about?
Absolutely. I don't think I had that consciously, but I certainly didn't have the answer. Meaning, I feel like in another version of this, I would have the answer. Like, why am I feeling this way? Oh, because X, Y, and Z. That would be help relieve. Like, oh, well, I have an answer, I have an explanation. Here, it's like, what in the world? And I think today, I know I think I can give myself the answer after discovering the Rebbe's counseling, and that is And of course, naturally, we're born self-absorbed, born preoccupied, we're born isolated in a certain way. And if we don't actively work on developing these awareness, and Hashem is with you, that the people in your life are there for a real reason, because you have something to give them and they have something to give you. You have something to learn from them. There's something to learn from you. You're placed where you are because there's a certain task for you in this world. And the simple exercise of learning how to stop thinking about your to-do list and stop thinking about your goals and stop thinking about what you're feeling, and to just take 5 minutes to think about someone else's life. And not because you made a resolution, you're going to help one person, so now it's another check on your days that you're going to do something for them. You're actually, you're it doesn't matter. I'm not coming any closer to any goal or any to-do list that I had. I'm just thinking about what's going on in that guy's life, like just for 5 minutes. And when you do that, you start seeing that there's probably a need. There's something where they can use a hand from you, physically, financially, spiritually, emotionally. And all these things slowly, like drip, drop, which is the Rebbe's, these are the tools that the Rebbe teaches. They drip, drop in you, and they mind expand you from that, Ayer para Adam Yivoli, which is a phrase the Rebbe uses, that a person is born a wild donkey. And it's a pasuk, which means like you're preoccupied with the self. And if you don't actively work to develop the mind expansion and the mind connection, maybe that the Rebbe teaches in his letters and beyond, and you try to bring that into your heart and your mind, you will naturally bump into a lot of turbulence, because you're becoming more and more lost in your own isolated being, which is the beginning and mother of illness in the Rebbe's conception. Isolation, but not in the only, meaning being alone in your own world.
Right.
It doesn't necessarily even mean being alone, like feeling alone. That's one type of emotional struggle that comes from isolation. It means
it's like all of your attention is directed inwards.
Yeah, you're like you're not. You're. Maybe that's the best way to put it.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, recovery, they would tell us all the time. It's like if you're in a really tough spot, call someone else and ask them how they're doing. It's like you get it.
Yeah.
And then for a moment, we can escape our own little world. And it's like, oh, wow, there's a whole world out there. And then additionally, if we get to have the opportunity to be useful. So was there, in your story, a watershed moment, a breakthrough, like, aha, this idea changed my life? Or was it more, to use an expression you just used, that it was, drip, 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 and 3-4 years later, you're like, wow, I feel better. These ideas have penetrated.
It wasn't 3-4 years. So like, oh, I feel better. It was a few months.
Oh, really? So it was a deep dive into...
Yeah, it was a few months. I'm saying to the point and I would say there wasn't like one letter or one like a watershed moment that way, but I do remember a very strong period of like, wow, this thing took me out. And like gratitude, like a sense of like humble gratitude. We're like, wow, that is. I'm in a
different place.
Yeah, like.
And the only thing I've done is read a bunch of letters.
And try to work on them and try to use them. Yeah, And I remember that. I remember very vivid. So there was like this like different type of like a very special period actually. I've like just feeling, in a way, deeply humbled. Because the whole experience was very humbling. It's the first time that I felt like just life itself pushing back on me. Like, it was like going forward, doing decent, and then all of a sudden, like, what is, like, what? Like, that wasn't part of the plan. Or like, I didn't factor in for this, And then working on these ideas where the Rebbe expands, like, okay, actually, this is a catalyst almost. This allows for opening yourself to these other way of seeing the world, other way of connecting to other people, other way of connecting to Hashem, other way of connecting and seeing yourself. And I remember finding myself on the other side, like I'm vibrant again. It didn't happen in a day, right? And then the gratitude that possessed me, like literally a sense of gratitude and serenity. That was like, wow.
Right. It is fascinating to get to this place because, like you're talking, I think before we turn on the cameras or the mics or both. You said that like for the last 3 weeks, you've been kind of every day, right, at another place, speaking, sharing, and getting this message out, your book, etc. And that doesn't feel possible from a space of you're dragging yourself.
Right. No.
Okay.
You know, you sometimes need to.
What?
Even if you're on little sleep, if there's an event, you gotta show up anyway. So there is the element of. It's not only.
Sure,
It's not
but
only
3 weeks. You can't do that for 3 weeks.
No, absolutely,
You can't.
absolutely, for sure.
Morning here, morning there. but you
Absolutely,
can't-
no,
right.
no.
Can't
No, I'm
do
saying
that.
it's not always. It's always. It's interesting because people assume, oh, so then it's all like just love, but no, love also comes with like the responsibility. You also need the side of responsibility that like this has to happen. Whatever. It's a tangent. Let's continue on what you're saying.
I think the main thing is that
Is the passion? Yeah, absolutely.
right. It's a powerful purpose.
Absolutely.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, and listen, today for this pod, I was in the middle of a bunch of work things. I hadn't been at work for a few days, and my kids were off at the beginning of the week, and then I had a dama, and I'm like buried in emails. I'm like, oh, I got to get home for this podcast. It's like, okay, I got to move, but that's like the specific energy, like at that moment of pulling myself out of the office. I have a task on, but overall, the
Yes, the
energy
only
that
way-
keeps us going
absolutely.
for 4 years.
Absolutely.
You know,
There's no
every
other way.
single way
Yeah.
of putting something out there is because there's a purpose. You know, at the beginning of a demo, we always started off where we go around and ask people like, well, why'd you come here? What brought you here? You know, you weren't looking for what to do that weekend, which hotel you want to go to, and maybe you show up at a men's retreat. Like, this is not easy work to do. There's definitely something that someone sees there that someone promised they're never going to do again in like their life, whether it's speak openly or jump in cold water or whatever else it is, you know, or share a room with someone. Like, there's something that on the outside is going to physically confront someone that they have to push through. And there are always certain themes that God sets it up in such a way, right? There's like 2 or 3 themes that everyone seems to be dealing with. Then there's the opportunity to all work through it together, the same point. And there was like this one after another, like unenthusiastic, lethargic, like even if things are going well in their life, but not like on the outside, but no energy. And it just felt like a theme. And I was sitting there, and when you shared the word humble gratitude, like I brought it back to that moment, it was like, wow, I was in this space. I was in this place of like, it doesn't matter. And today I'm in this place of like, I wish I had more than 24 hours in a day.
Mm-hmm.
Right? It's like that. Like, there's so much, and knowing that nothing has to shift. Like, nothing on the outside has to shift in our circumstance for us to just feel this.
Like how you look at the infinite. To go
Yeah,
back to it. Like,
right.
It's the same infinite. But
Yes, this powerful sense of purpose, like
Yeah.
pulsing. And saying,
I remember the words that I thought then was like, it's the same. The color left to the faces, and the color came back. I don't mean faces is necessarily human, like to life and to the world. So it's like nothing changed, but the color came back to the face of it all. For some reason, that was a phrase to me that's
Yes,
descriptive.
interesting,
Maybe
right.
it doesn't describe
yeah,
the
yeah.
others.
No,
But
I understand what you mean.
because the color, like it's
There's
just,
a vibrancy. There's
yeah,
we're
it's just-
alive.
what changed? I don't know. Somehow the energy of the letters and then the way I was trying to bring, it wasn't always direct, but they brought in this. They brought back the color. They brought back the life to me and the way I saw the world and myself. And I remember this vividly. I remember the whole time. It was actually, to be accurate about the story that you said. That's when I decided that I should probably work on it, but I still didn't act on it for another 2 years. It was cooking in my head.
Right.
I needed, but it wasn't like, okay.
I
Then
need to
I
share
sat
this.
down. It was 2 years. 2 years later when I started.
I
Then
need
it
to share
started
this
5
chocolate
years.
cake.
Yeah.
Right. So
Yeah.
it's like I ate a chocolate cake, and I need to share the chocolate cake.
So it was cooking in my head. Like I was like, it's sad. I'm like, okay, this should be, brought forward. And I had my notebook, and I had the themes that I knew that I kind of constructed in my head that I was using. But it took 2 years till I started the 5 years of actually putting the book together.
Right. I think there's a difference. I mean, and maybe it's felt in the information itself. I don't know. Right. But I think, like, in terms of sharing the story, I think there's a qualitative difference between sharing knowledge and sharing wisdom. Again, wisdom is like I've experienced the benefits of this knowledge. I'm not just
Yeah.
regurgitating information that I
Yeah.
got from someone else. I hope it helps you.
Yeah.
I don't need it, but maybe you do because you're a sick man. So like,
Yeah.
there you go. Versus, no, this is earned wisdom. This is
Right.
like I've worked through it. I've seen the impact of it. I know how it's changed my life, and I want to share that with you. And I think it hits people in a very different way. The question is, right, which would be interesting: can an audience decipher wisdom from knowledge without someone going into that a little bit?
Explain.
Meaning, I'm thinking like if I said everything I said, okay, about porn, everything I ever said about porn, but I left out one detail. right? That I used to struggle and I no longer do. Right? I
Mhm.
used to struggle a lot with this thing. It was like a morning and night activity,
Right.
and today it's out of my life.
Right.
Right? If I left out that detail, but I just shared everything else that
Right.
I did about porn and how toxic shame is to it, and why it's important to do this, and that these steps can help, and whatever,
Yeah.
the role of technology in helping you, but the limits of technology in helping someone, all of those things, whatever I shared about it, would it land for someone in the same way? Because it is actually wisdom, meaning I didn't arrive. I remember seeing this therapist named Benjamin Tepfer, and he was talking about sex addiction. And I was like, and as he was talking and being asked questions, I was like, my experience, like, what, and I don't know if it was his personal journey with it or just a lot of clinical experience. Either way, it's wisdom, meaning if he's helped a couple hundred people out of addiction. But to me, it was like, I was so sure he knew what he was talking about because he arrived at information that I arrived at through hard work, right?
Mhm.
It was like, it was real experienced. I experienced the benefits of the knowledge he was sharing, which I'm using the word wisdom to describe that. So if someone doesn't speak from personal experience, someone doesn't use that, they don't mention it, will the audience anyway, will it hit for the audience in the same way? I wonder. So I wonder, meaning, okay, because it is wisdom, so it just lands for a person and the personal touch doesn't need to be shared. For me, I always felt like it has to be, but also I don't have the credentials.
What do you think? What do you think the answer is?
I think for myself, I know, like, I want to hear, like, how did you earn this?
Right.
How did you earn the right to preach to me about this topic? Because and then once someone it's my experience, okay, now you're not preaching.
Right.
Like now you're sharing
So
something.
that's
with me.
why,
Especially something sensitive like mental health.
so that's why I pushed myself to write an introduction of this, literally exactly that. That I'm not whatever. This just came to me as something that I experienced the benefit of, and I want to share with you. Maybe it'll come to use. I did write that in the introduction. I think you're saying like, why don't I write in every chapter how it helped me, or maybe,
no.
or maybe you're maybe
No, I'm not
not.
saying the
Maybe-
book was
maybe
beautiful. The book was really beautiful as it was, stands alone. I'm saying that,
in general.
yeah, in general, I think it's very, very valuable.
Absolutely,
Yeah,
absolutely. I felt the need specifically for this reason. Meaning, it wasn't that I want. It was just like I hate the idea of like preaching. Right? I'm repulsed by it.
Yes.
And I'm like, well, am I gonna be like, no, I'm not. I'm not doing this. I want to communicate with the reader and disarm him and say, hey, brother, I'm not. We're on the same page. This is just some body of wisdom from the Rebbe that I found useful, and I just here it is. Take it, leave it, do whatever you want.
Right.
Like not like I didn't have like a Fatzamayanas project to push on you like this thing. Although that's also nice, but whatever.
Right.
But that just there was something in me that was like, I need to communicate this. I want to
Yeah, and the extent of it, I think that the more someone sees it, I'll give you an example. I don't know why this example was coming to me, but when I remember sharing once, it was in Lubavitch Yeshiva, it was one of the first times I shared my story of being sexually abused. That's where I first started speaking. I just shared about being sexually abused. And I mentioned that I was abused by a teenager. I mentioned like that detail, that the guy who abused me was a teenager. And the guy came to me afterwards and he said, like, I'm so glad you shared that detail because I was never able to accept the fact that I was abused because the guy who did it was also a kid. But when you said, like, I saw the pain, I saw the realness of it, and I saw, this was one of my first speeches, and it was in front of my family for the first time, so there was a lot of raw pain in that talk. And he said, well, like, when I saw that, and you also mentioned this detail, it kind of gave me permission, it gave me permission to feel this too. So sometimes those specific details could be also what, like, oh, yeah, that's my story.
Right.
That's my story. And it
Right.
connects in a different way.
Right. People find themselves in the specific.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I guess it's kind of the whole, I keep going back to the 12 steps because to me, there's also like a certain wisdom that's, been arrived at in that place. Like there's something really, really here about healing, about, it's more than healing, like spiritual transformation. Like there's something really, really, really here. in the 12 steps. And one of the things that are interesting is there are many different 12-step programs, right, for everything under the sun. And the most interesting is when you get into drugs. You can have like every single one: crystal meth anonymous, heroin anonymous, marijuana anonymous. Right? You have more broad ones. You can have alcoholics anonymous. You have more broad ones. Let's say narcotics anonymous, right? A more broad one. But so you have like within 12 steps, you have children, and children are like grandchildren also. But then you have gamblers, you have overeaters, you have debtors anonymous. But all the steps are the same. They change one word. We were powerless over alcohol. We're powerless over sex. We're powerless over gambling. We're powerless over crystal meth, heroin, narcotics, whatever, right? They change that word. In terms of the solution, it's all the same. Once we get to the solution of the problem, it's all 100% the same. But still, there's so many different meanings. And I think that's the reason why. It's like sometimes we're so thick-headed. We need to hear, it so obviously, because we do this. Our minds like distance ourselves. I'm not like this person. I'm not like this person.
Right.
And
you told me once the story of the brother with the cars.
Yeah.
Or the cousin, or
yeah, two brothers with the car. I couldn't be more different than my brother. Down to the car we drive. So what kind of car do you drive? What kind of car does he drive? He says, Ferrari, whatever, something or other. I said, you drive the same car? He says, yeah, but mine is blue and his is yellow.
Yeah, it's an amazing story.
He was serious as, it's like we find differences between us, between people, and then we say, I can't relate. I'm not the same. If it worked for him, it doesn't mean it'll work for me. And sometimes when we hear that like a specific detail, it just, and it's not, pushing for you to tell your story. I can't be accused of sensationalism because there's nothing sensational about it.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? So I like it because it's not for that reason. I think it really adds an element. I want to think if we, so I should say about the book, which, we jumped in a little bit, but I've read it. I shared it with my wife. I read it again. Like I said, it's been a few months since I read it now, so I'm not like fresh with all the ideas. Like what I really liked, there were number one, it's very well written, very easy to read, easy to digest, like similar to what I shared about another author. You can pick it up, you want to finish it. And I remember feeling it was too short because it's kind of not as big as it looks because of how long, right? The footnotes. The footnotes are half the book.
A third.
What?
A third of the book.
It felt like a lot.
Right.
And it's good. I'm saying it's good, but it left me as a reader wanting more. It's like, oh wow, we're already done. That's maybe why I read it again. And then it had me thinking a few times, about even it's a topic that I'm steeped in. I was like, okay, that's very interesting. I remember that feeling a few times. Okay, like that's nice. The work thing really stuck with me because I don't think I focused on that. I don't think I emphasized that. Like I speak to so many people about their healing journey and then seeing like, it's so essential. It's so essential to have productive work. And oftentimes I'll talk about all these other elements. I remember that one.
A few people point, the other component of that chapter is about schedule, the importance of schedule. It's a few different things that in similar spirit: work, taking care of your body, and schedule, and being social, having a social life, like in the physical sense, like literally not being locked at like seeing people.
Yes.
There's a few points in that chapter too. It's fascinating to me. I always thought that was one of the chapters I put in because, listen, this is the theme in the Rebbe's counseling. It's going in. Like, when I set out, I told myself that I'm not trying to say the interesting things in the Rebbe's counseling. I'm trying to say the recurring things. People can decide what they find interesting, what they don't. I want every recurring idea, even if it seems most common sense, is going in. So I never thought that chapter was going to be more of the. I can't tell you how many people mentioned to me that chapter about, wow, the need for schedule, that, if you have a chaotic outer life, this is the phrase there, but it will automatically and naturally cause inner chaos. And then you see letters of the Rebbe's counseling people, and the Rebbe writes to this girl, and she's like, from your letter, it seems to me that you're assuming a very deep, buried issues that are like, insurmountable. To me, it seems that if you would work on your schedule and live a more organized life, and the Rebbe gives her a tip. He says, if you take a job, or you take a work that gives you responsibility to others, because a lot of times it's hard to change your life on its own terms, just on your own when you've lived very long in a different way. And then you'll see that it may not be something very deep. It may actually come down to the way your lifestyle is. So that's just another connected to work. You have like scheduled this concrete side of emotional health that
Yes.
multiple people have come to me and say that was so enlightening. So it's
Yeah.
I say I did learn. Side note, I did learn on the job that you never know what
What's
people
gonna land
want to
for someone.
hear and what's enlightening to people. So just do yourself a favor and stay true to the source, because even if you think you're improving, you actually may not be. So
Right.
it's just a
Very
side
interesting.
lesson. But no, I really appreciate what you said. Thank you.
Yeah, there's also the I think a lot of people have acknowledged that there's a mental health crisis, right? Like we're definitely seeing issues at a rate that we didn't see previously. So what's the element? And one you can attribute to things like social media, email, and like a lot of work. We're not interacting with people. But another is there's a way to live today without working. Like there are some people who live just decent lives. The amount of people I know who just don't have a job.
Really? How do they support themselves?
Doesn't matter. They made money at some point. I don't know. Like,
Well,
I mean, I would say even in my own life, right, without a lot of these other things that I take on, I'm not sure that my pure business life, my pure like what I do every day to earn money, does not.
need your direct involvement.
No, it doesn't. It doesn't. It does. It doesn't take up as much energy as I have.
Right.
Right. It doesn't. So I don't know if this was possible 20 years ago, the way people worked, but today, the way we can do things on email, the way we can be more efficient, the way we can work remotely, the way COVID changed us in a completely different way. There's so many more people. It used to be much more expected to be in a certain place, be certain things. The amount of meetings that started happening then on Zoom and continue to. So you have to travel much less for business than one used to. There's just a different cadence and a different approach to work. And then you have a lot of other things. You don't have to go to the grocery. Practically, you don't have to go to the grocery. You never have to pick people up from the airport. There are things that were in lives 20, 30 years ago that we did that somehow consumed hours.
Right.
It just don't. You could go to the grocery if you want. If you want to spend an extra couple bucks, buy everything on Instacart, then you're fine. You certainly don't need to go shopping for that's even like grocery, but for most other things you don't need to. There's a way to live a half decent life. Some people take it to extreme, just figure out how to do credit card balancing or other stuff. Whatever, people do, or a little freelance work here and there. They're a coach. They have 8 hours a week of coaching, and then they're free the other bunch of hours. There are many different ways to do this. Just it definitely seems to be we're in this time and space that allows us much more time than we've probably ever had, and there's something beautiful about that. That we could go and uncover things and do things that others didn't have the freedom to explore, and it could go the other way, right? Like if you're a born researcher, for example, right? There's like a certain amount of power in your brain, and if the only thing you have to research is like your own conundrums, it's a lot of brain power to right to direct
Keep
inward.
active, yeah.
Yeah, so I think I think the same is true. I had a lot of energy that was going sideways into porn addiction, into other stuff, and once that gets removed, it needs to be directed towards productive things.
Like it's to bring it all back together.
Yeah,
That the energetic piece, that there's no way of just like killing it.
right. And for whatever reason, I missed it. I missed it as an essential component in healing. I talked to so many people, and I saw it there crystallize something for me. Is cool. Like, how are we going to help someone if they don't have the building blocks of a functioning, a functioning day? Yeah. I should share about Milan B'Kodesh in my personal life. So I kept encountering this in letters from the Rebbe, right? Milan B'Kodesh, which actually shifted something as it related to my approach with halacha. So even things like Shabbos or kosher or stuff like that, where it always felt like a huge burden to me, this stuff. And I was like, oh, like kosher, Shabbos, like this thing, like in order to do kosher, I have to do all of these things. In order to do Shabbos, I have to do all of these things. And it felt like a very all or nothing kind of proposition. And then when I came across the idea of Malam HaKodesh, I was okay, so it's the same idea here. So if I You can take it overall within Judaism. And within Judaism, there's 613 mitzvahs, and a lot of them you can't practice today. It's like, how many are we actually talking about? So the only way to say Ma'alim B'Kodesh means that, this is the way I understood it, is that within Shabbos, just Shabbos, we can Ma'alim B'Kodesh. Just kosher, we can Ma'alim B'Kodesh. So, and then that instruction is as relevant to the person on the first step of his journey to the guy who's kept Shabbos for 80 years. Like the guy who's keeping Shabbos for 80 years, Ma'alim B'Kodesh. Like figure out a way to do Shabbos more. And when I saw that, like it relaxed something in me around Shabbos. I was like, oh, there was a point in time where the extent of my Shabbos was that I didn't work on Shabbos. And I used to say in my mind, I don't keep Shabbos. That was my mind. And now when I look back, yes, I did. I didn't work on Shabbos. Like that was like something I didn't go to the office. I didn't really do Shabbos.
Right.
And then slowly became, I stopped putting my phone away. And then slowly became, okay, I'm going to figure out this halacha. And then you get these books. A friend of mine sent me all the books. I'm like, whoa, like, there's a lot here. Yeah. There's a lot here. But instead of saying, okay, I don't even know what all these books say, you start reading it. It's Ma'alim B'Kodesh. What am I doing more for this? How am I doing more than I was previously? And whatever I do in 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, like there's also that energy of more. It relaxed so much of the burden that I felt was placed on me with religion. Like I'm not, until I do this, I'm not keeping Shabbos. It's like, no, there's like, I don't think of it as keeping Shabbos anymore. I think of it as continuously doing more for Shabbos.
Unbelievable. And this is what I'm saying, also circling back earlier, that you see this as a liberating, you see this as a calming recognition. That's what I find so fascinating again and again in this conversation, is that the Ma'alim B'Kodesh, that's so liberating. I think that's a great perspective. No, I think many people feel like that's a weight. We're seeing just the opposite. The stagnation is the weight. It's like, that's it. That's Shabbos. Like this.
It's not like all or nothing. Like someone else, like I'm doing it, you're not.
Right. But the fact that the person's 80 years into Shabbos needs to grow in Shabbos, the liberation of that.
Yes.
Meaning, whatever, how the infinite bringing out how the infinite is the source of fire and life, and in an unbelievable way if you get in touch. And that I'm saying, it keeps hitting on me that like you're seeing Ma'alim B'Kodesh as the most exciting and liberating and also like calming recognition. Like Ma'alim B'Kodesh, like we could, we're on an endless journey here, and like that is something to know for the end and something to know for the beginning, and that changes everything. No, I find that fascinating.
There were two themes that like I saw in Ma'alim B'Kodesh over and over, and then a friend of mine who I was talking to about kind of my journey and getting more religion and where my wife was with it and stuff like that. So he shared with me, he's like, the Rebbe's like letters were full with my Ma'at Argashena.
Yes.
Go.
I have a whole endnote on that, so you can read the endnote. I have a whole endnote, like collecting all the different Lat Argashena letters, about like step by step. I have a long endnote on step by step, all different ways and places the Rebbe draws it from. One is that pasuk, and different ways the Rebbe applies it. So it's in there.
So it's like those two themes, and it was so relaxing. Recently my wife started keeping Shabbos, and her way, I want to say keeping Shabbos. She started doing more for Shabbos, right? Putting her phone away and not cooking on Shabbos, whatever, a number of different things. She's like, I'm not doing Shabbos. And a couple of weeks ago, we went to a hotel, and there I saw she was like frazzled. She's like, oh shoot, she didn't think about it. She didn't understand what was, I didn't think about it before. So we got there, let's say 10 minutes before Shabbat started, and they put us on the 17th floor, and there's like all of these complications. And she's like, how am I going to do it? I didn't prepare. I can't even light in the room, all these things. And I kind of felt this energy like, okay, if she feels like she didn't keep Shabbos this week, she didn't do it this week, then next week we'll go back home and she'll just drop the whole thing. Because anyway, like if this all or nothing, and I was like, just chill. I said, I'll tell you from my perspective, as I started this, like when you said you're going to start keeping, you didn't contemplate a hotel. Like you didn't contemplate, right? Just chill out. You contemplated being in a home setting. You were pregnant at that time. There was a certain life you were living. Just do what you do, feel good about it, right? It's like, to me, it was almost like, if this is more Shabbos than your last hotel experience, like you're ma'at mother, like you're doing something.
Right.
Like don't, this heavy weight that someone put on of like, this is keeping Shabbos, this is not keeping Shabbos. Whoever told you that wasn't doing Shabbos according to everything under the sun. They had like captured up to a certain point. Like I found sometimes like my wife was feeling bad, like I'm keeping Shabbos and she's not. I'm like, there's definitely so many things that I'm not doing. Like why would I put that burden on you? And I found that these ways, I don't know, for myself, they've been much more sustainable. And that's why I feel it's liberating. It's
I get exactly, because I remember this with my grandmother. I remember I was speaking to her and I was telling her that I was speaking to someone in her community, and they said, I'm a Baal Tshuva. And she like responded with such frustration. She says, I hate that term, and I hate when someone identifies as that, because like they're saying like in a denigrating, like he's like, what do you mean? Like we're all kol yama b'tshuva. Like the biggest aspiration is to always like I'm also about. What does it mean you became like we're all in this mind and bakayda shot like exactly saying like you're a Machal Shabbos and you're a Shomer Shabbos and you're like wait so I'm not in the Shomer Shabbos bracket.
It feels like
so
an
now
on-off switch.
But the point is the Shomer Shabbos is not in the Shomer Shabbos bracket either. Call Yom of Tshuva. Like Tshuva is the true Tshuva is a constant coming closer and closer and growing infinitely, and therefore. Like that whole condescension and like you're looking at the whole thing wrong. You're looking at yourself wrong and looking at where you are now wrong, and you're looking at the other guy wrong, right? So I think I'm getting what you're saying is that I'm the Machal, he's the Shomer, he's not the Shomer, and I'm not the Machal, and we're on a journey of growth in Yiddishkeit. We're in the same. Brings us closer, I
think a much better way would be. I tell my kids, I started doing something, I'll do races against each other, and everyone's upset. So I tell my kids, okay, like swim the pool, measure how far you get, and okay, it took 50 seconds to swim the pool, okay, now beat your number. Right? So, and it's kind of the same thing I thought for Shabbos, like if I take this all the way to the end, it's my Shabbos is no good if it looks very similar to the way it did. And then at different points, maybe today I can say a year, but if I'm Ma'ala Makaidish, and maybe in 3 years I have to say it looks better every 6 months, right? Like it has to increase, it has to progressively in some way get better. And if someone is like Shomer Shabbos technically, but their Shabbos looks identical to the way it did 10 years ago, then
they're not
right. You might not be keeping Shabbos. And if someone's Shabbos is significantly different than it was, then they're Ma'ala Makaidish. Like that idea felt so much more. Like I said, liberating. Then I was like, halacha, like this absolute, like I broke the law. I like, it felt very okay. Like I'm free. I have this, almost like a person. Something called Shabbos, and I want to continue give towards it. And it's like, I can give this, and in a few months maybe I can give that.
Right. And there's one anecdote, I think I shared this with you once, I think really talks to the broader conversation we're having kind of all along in search for more in the Jewish way, Menuchas Nefesh, and Rabbi Steinsaltz's meditation about the Rebbe. I think I told this to you once about there's a famous Chassidic story of the Rebbe, the guy who came and said, don't space in my house. He said, bring in the cows. Came back and said, the Rebbe, it's even worse. He said, bring in the horses, bring in even more, bring in the goats. And then, finally, let's take it all out. Like, oh my gosh, you have such a massive house. So Rebbe Steinsaltz used to say that by the Rebbe used to say, your house is small, is to bring in the cows. Your house is small, bring in the horses. And so same, spirit as the famous Chassidic Rebbe of the story. The only difference is by the Rebbe, he never took it out. He kept saying, but what he added, and I think this is the crux of the issue, and maybe needs more unpacking and more understanding.
Yeah,
we'll leave that to whoever. Is that he said there's a law in physics that if you add weight onto something, the density of the matter it changes, and it's able to carry more than it was able to before. And in other words, what he's saying is the end of the story is the same as the Polish Rebbe, that the house becomes bigger. The house does become bigger. And the way the house becomes bigger, the Rebbe kind of had this intuition about people, or about our capacity as human beings and as Jews to grow exponentially, to grow to an entirely different place. And he wanted to bring out that energy through saying there's more, and there's even more, and there's even more, and there's even more, and that we change in the process, not that we become more and more overwhelmed. There's new parts of us that we didn't know existed that emerge and allow for the house to feel very big. It actually becomes bigger. Right. And that's his meditation on the Rebbe. And I think that's somehow kind of what we're trying to say is that somehow the infinite and somehow the Ma'alim B'Kodesh and somehow the Yechol Mechayil Chayil and somehow the work and the life and the energy and the movement, with it comes peace. With it comes a real piece, a real big house. Now, again, I don't think we fully got down to the bottom of that, but I see it. I don't know how to, like, I see it when I think about the Rebbe's counseling, when I learn it, when I try to implement it. I sense this. Haven't yet found the words to put in. Maybe you have some better words, but that's just yeah.
Well, I will tell you this, is that when I read your book, so obviously I knew it was your first book that you wrote, because we had corresponded before. I remember feeling at the time that I hope this isn't the last book you write.
Oh, that's very kind.
So
Okay.
I hope this isn't the last book you write. I figured I'll tell it to you, and I hope your trip here, your tour, so to speak, goes exceptionally well. Your book touches many, many people, including yourself.
Amen. That's the hardest one.
Well,
Actually, I'll end with this. Just my grandfather, maybe will. Before the book came out, he said, I want to tell you a story. So he starts telling me that, there's a guy who went to the theater once with his friend, or his Broadway baby, and he's watching the show. It's unbelievably emotional show. And, they're laughing and crying, and the acting's amazing. And the friend is going through the whole emotional roller coaster that the actors and the show was able to pull off. And he looks at the guys, the friend that he brought with him to the show, and he sees stone cold, just no emotion. Like at the end of the show, he's like, "What happened? Like, that was so enthralling. There was so much there." So he said, "My friend, I wrote the show." So my grandfather didn't explain anything further. He just said, "You should know the story before." I was like, "Yes, I got you." So you're saying it should touch me also. Like, I appreciate the blessing of that, because beautiful. it's not self-understood.
Beautiful.
But yeah, thank you very much. I really appreciate that.
That was, as they say, wisdom, not knowledge.
Yes, exactly.
All right, thank you so much. Thank you for coming on the show, and we called it a show. And we'll see each other soon.